The chandelier trembled first. A faint crystalline hum threaded through the silence of Malfoy Manor's east drawing room, where Draco sat with a ledger balanced on his knee, the firelight casting long, wavering shadows across the gilded ceiling. The house had always breathed with a sort of restless elegance, its magic seeping through cracks in the floorboards and sighing behind tapestries. But then the air thickened, like syrup poured over breath, and the quill in his hand snapped clean in two. He froze. Cold prickled across his scalp, not from fear but from recognition. This wasn't the house. This was Star Bloodstar. A pulse of silver light flared from the floor beneath him, spiraling up through the rug in intricate ancient patterns. The Malfoy sigil, etched into the stone foundation for centuries, had never been visible, until now. But it wasn't alone. Interwoven with the serpent's coil was a second symbol, one he didn't recognize, a spiral bound by three intersecting lines like roots knotted around a forgotten vow. Draco stood too quickly, knocking the ledger to the floor. "No," he whispered, but his voice didn't sound like his own. It carried an echo, layered with voices older than the manor, older than the war. The magic surged again, sharper this time, lancing up through his boots and into his bones. He staggered, catching himself on the mantel. His vision whited out, then returned, not to the room, but to memory. Not his memory. A torchlit crypt. A man in robes darker than midnight, his face carved from the same stone as the ancestors in the gallery. A dagger in his hand. Blood dripping onto parchment sealed with wax, the color of dried roses. "Star, by my name and blood, Star," the man intoned. "Star, I bind myself and all who come after to the service of the Granger line, until the debt of betrayal is repaid. So long as their blood flows, mine shall serve." Star, and then the name whispered like a curse, like a prayer. "Star Hermione." "Star Draco," gasped, collapsing to one knee. The vision vanished, but the weight remained, pressing against his chest like a hand made of frost. His breath came in ragged bursts. "That's impossible," he rasped. "The Grangers were muggles. There's no blood magic, no link." But the sigil still glowed beneath his feet. He pressed his palm to the floor, wincing at the jolt of energy that shot up his arm. The magic wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was star-awake Star. And it knew him. He had read of such things in the deeper vaults of the family library. Oaths of fealty, blide bindings, ancestral pacts sealed with magic so old it had no name. But they were myths, superstitions. The kind of stories Lucius had dismissed as peasant tales, unworthy of a pure blood of his stature. Yet here it was, alive, Star, real Star, and bound to Star, her Star. The thought sent a strange tremor through him. Not revulsion, not entirely. Something more complicated. A knot of shame, perhaps, or guilt, long buried beneath years of silence and half-truths. He had never apologized, not truly. Not after the war, not after everything. Now the magic wouldn't let him forget. He pushed himself up, trembling, and walked to the window. The ground stretched before him, cloaked in early dusk, the trees like sentinels holding their breath. He needed answers. The library. The oldest tomes, the ones bound in human skin, and sealed with blood locks. If the oath was real, its origins would be there. But even as he turned toward the door, a single phrase echoed in his skull, spoken in that ancient voice. "Star, so long as their blood flows, mine shall serve." Star, Hermione Granger was alive. Brilliant, relentless, Star, infuriatingly star-alive. And whether he liked it or not, he was bound to her. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the windows of Malfoy Manor, soft as a whisper, like the house itself was trying not to wake old ghosts. Draco stood in the east drawing room, fingers tracing the spine of a crumbling grimoire bound in blackened leather. The air smelled of dust and dried sage, the lingering scent of wards long strained. He had not slept, not properly in days. Every time he closed his eyes, the same dream returned, the sigil etched in silver fire across the floor of the ancestral vault, pulsing with a heartbeat not his own. And always the voice, low and ancient, speaking in a tongue that slithered through his blood. "Star, the dead awakens. Star." A sharp crack split the silence. He turned, wand already in hand, but it was only a ministry owl. Gray-feathered, tired-eyed, perched on the sill, a wax-sealed scroll clenched in its talons. The Malfoy crest had been partially melted away, replaced with the blunt insignia of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Draco took the scroll. The parchment felt warm, almost alive. He broke the seal with a flick of his thumb. The message was brief, written in crisp, official script. Star, Mr. Draco Malfoy. You are hereby summoned to the Ministry of Magic, Level 2, Office of Magical Investigations, at 10 o'clock this morning, to answer questions regarding a recent and significant disturbance in the ambient magical field originating from the Malfoy estate. Failure to comply will result in immediate apprehension. Star, no explanation, no courtesy, just obligation. He folded the letter slowly, tucking it into the inner pocket of his coat. The clock on the mantel read 9:23. Outside, the sky had turned the color of bruised stone. The ministry atrium was colder than he remembered. The golden fountain had long been replaced. A modest statue of a phoenix now stood in its place. Wings half spread, flames carved in quiet stone. Ministry employees bustled past in robes of deep blue, eyes forward, voices hushed. None looked at him, but he felt their weight all the same. A witch, in an auror's cloak, met him at the lists. Mr. Malfoy, this way. She did not offer her name. Her wand tapped once against her thigh, as much a warning as a habit. They descended in silence. The Office of Magical Investigations occupied a dim, high-ceiling chamber, lined with enchanted dials and shimmering glass orbs that pulsed like distant stars. At the center of the room stood a single circular table, and seated beside it, her hair tamed into a loose braid, robes the color of autumn leaves, was Hermione Granger. She looked up as he entered. For a moment neither spoke. "You've been busy," she said finally, voice measured. "I didn't summon ancient magic for sport, if that's what you're implying." "No," she said, opening a file before her, but it responded to Star You Star, and it named Star Me Star, named. Draco's breath caught. The witch beside him placed a device on the table, a crystal orb suspended in silver rings humming faintly. "This is a resonance recorder. It captured the event. We'd like you to listen." She activated it with a tap of her wand. A voice filled the room, deep, guttural, speaking in the old tongue. Draco recognized it instantly. It was the same voice from his dreams, but now, layered beneath it, another voice answered. Feminine, familiar. "Star, Granger, Star," it said, clear as a bell. "Star. Blood calls to blood. The oath is not broken. It waits. Star." Hermione's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "That's impossible," Draco said. "The oath, those records were sealed, buried." "Apparently," she said quietly. "They were only sleeping." The Auror stepped forward. The magical surge registered as a Class 4 awakening. It bypassed all Malfoy wards and imprinted a sigil on the Ministry's detection grid, one we haven't seen in over 3 centuries. "It bears the Malfoy crest, and the word Star Granger Star." Draco stared at her. "That's not possible. My family has no ties to yours. Not by blood, not by magic." Hermione met his gaze. "Maybe not in this century, but magic remembers what history forgets." A silence settled between them, thick and charged. Outside, the ministry clocks chimed 10. Somewhere deep in the building, an alarm began to hum, and Draco felt it again, the pull beneath his ribs, like a thread tightening, drawing him toward something older than revenge, older than war, something that had been waiting, for him, for her. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the leaded glass of Hermione's study, a dull percussion beneath the silence that had settled between them. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting long shadows that curled like smoke across the floorboards. Draco stood near the door, his posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back as though he were reporting to a superior, which, in some twisted magical sense, perhaps he was. The parchment in Hermione's hands trembled slightly, though not from fear. It was the weight of the words, the undeniable truth, etched in ancient ink, that had seeped through time like blood through stone. "I still don't understand why it chose Star Me Star," she said, voice low, eyes scanning the brittle document once more. "The Granger line has no claim to noble houses. We're Star Muggle's Star. One, it doesn't matter," Draco replied, not unkindly, but with the tired finality of someone who had spent too many nights reading the same cursed texts. The oath doesn't care about blood purity or pedigree. It answers to balance, to debt. And apparently, the Malfoys owe your family a reckoning that spans 3 centuries. She exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temple. And yet, it manifests star. After all this time, after the war, after everything, magic has its own timing. He stepped forward, just one step, into the halo of lamplight. His face looked thinner than she remembered, the sharp angles of his jaw more pronounced, the silver in his hair catching the dim glow like frost. The wards at Malfoy Manor flared 2 nights ago. The ancestral mirror, the one that records oaths, lit up with your family name. Hermione Granger, daughter of William and Jane. Born September 19th, 1979, bound to Draco Lucius Malfoy by the oath of subservience, reactivated by blood acknowledgement. "That's insane," she whispered. "I didn't acknowledge anything, but I did," he said quietly. "But I named you in the lineage register during the post-war reconciliations, when I admitted, in front of the Wisengamot, that your actions saved lives, that I owed you." He didn't flinch as he said it, but his fingers twitched at his sides. The magic took that as confirmation. Hermione stared at him. For years she had believed Draco Malfoy incapable of sincerity. Now, standing in her quiet home, she saw not the boy who called her Star Mudblood Star, nor the man who once served a Dark Lord, but someone burdened by something older than either of them. Something neither had chosen. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "If I say no, then the magic will find another way," he said. "It might turn to your children, and if I revive, it will wait. It's already waited 300 years. She turned to the window, watching the rain blur the edge of the garden. The rosemary was overgrowing again. She'd meant to prune it yesterday. Life, so ordinary, so her star, and now this. The ancient debt, a binding, a man who once despised her, now bound to serve her. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. But then she thought of her parents, safe in Australia, living lives rewritten by her wand, of the guilt she still carried for that, of how she had spent years trying to balance scales that no one else even saw. "Fine," she said, turning back. "I'll help you, but on my terms." Draco raised an eyebrow, though relief flickered in his eyes. Fleeting, but there. No condescension. No veiled insults. "You treat me as an equal in this, as a researcher, as a wizard, as a person, and you tell me everything. Every scrap of lore, every memory, every whisper your family's dark little library might hold." He gave a slow nod. "Agreed. And," she added, voice softening, "you don't do anything without my permission. Not fetching tea, not opening doors. I don't want a servant. I want a partner in this. If we're going to unravel this curse, we do it together. Not master and servant, just 2 people trying to fix a wrong." Draco looked at her for a long moment, the firelight catching the gray in his eyes. Then, hesitantly, he extended his hand. "Then, let it be so, Hermione Granger, partner." She hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was cool, firm. The moment their hands met, the air between them shimmered, faintly, like heat off stone, and somewhere deep in the walls of the house, an old clock chimed, though none had worked in years. The first sign was the cold. Draco Malfoy felt it as he stepped out of the flue at Malfoy Manor, a sharp metallic chill that slivered up his spine despite the roaring fire in the grate. He paused, one hand braced against the marble mantel, breath fogging in the air even though the room was warm. Something was wrong. The house, once a fortress of silken shadows and whispered allegiance, felt watchful. The tapestries seemed to lean inward. The chandelier above flickered with candlelight that cast no heat. Then came the pain. It started as a dull throb beneath his left wrist, hidden beneath the cuff of his black dress shirt. He barely noticed at first, just a twinge like an old wound remembering rain. But by the time he reached his study, it had sharpened into a pulse in time with his heartbeat. He rolled up his sleeve, expecting a bruise, a rash, anything ordinary. Instead, he found the sigil. It coiled around his wrist like a serpent forged from ink and starlight, deep umber etched into his pale skin as though burned there by a steady hand. The mark pulsed once, slow, deliberate, then stilled. Draco recoiled, fumbling for his wand, but no incantation he cast would dispel it. No counter-charm, no cleansing rune, not even star finite incantatum star, had any effect. The magic was ancient, older than the house, older than the name Malfoy itself. He traced the outer edge with a trembling finger. The skin was unbroken, yet the symbol star lived star. It wasn't merely drawn, it was star-bound star. The realization came like ice water down his spine. The oath had awakened. He'd heard fragments of it as a child. Whispers from his mother when she thought he wasn't listening, muttered in the hush between midnight and dawn. The blood must answer when the dead is called. The Malfoy line serves until the balance is paid. Star he'd dismissed it as old magic superstition, the kind of ghost story used to scare pure-blood children into obedience. But this was real, and it demanded. By morning the sigil had begun to pull, not physically, not exactly, but when he apparated to Diagon Alley, the sensation sharpened into a taut thread in his chest, snapping him back like a dog on a leash. He tried again. The same. A third time, he aimed for the ministry, only for the magic to wrench him sideways, depositing him instead on the rain-slicked pavement outside a small book-lined shop in Muggle London. Hermione Granger's shop. He stood there, breath-ragged, collar-soaked from the drizzle, staring at the glowing sign above the door, Star Arcane and Quill Star. The sigil on his wrist throbbed once, warmed this time, almost satisfied. The bell chimed as he pushed inside. The scent of old paper, bergamot, and something faintly floral, filled the air. She was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, ink staining her fingers as she repaired a torn page with a delicate wand movement and a murmured charm. She looked up, startled. "Draco Malfoy," she said, voice measured. "I wasn't expecting company." He didn't answer at first. The sigil burned now, not with pain, but with purpose. He held out his wrist, turning it so the mark faced her. Hermione's breath caught. She set down her wand and stepped around the counter, her movements careful, deliberate. Up close, he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her hair, still wild, still brilliant, curled slightly at the nape of her neck. She reached for his arm, then hesitated. "May I?" she asked. He nodded. Her fingers brushed his skin, and the sigil flared, gold for a heartbeat, then dark again. Hermione stepped back as if burned. "This is old magic," she whispered. "Pre-Goblin Wars. I've only seen references to it in Saxon grimoires. It's a blood-bound oath, unbreakable, self-enforcing. It doesn't just bind you, Draco. Its star finds star its counterpart. And the counterpart is you," she said, meeting his eyes. "It's tied to my bloodline. The Grangers, or someone like me." He laughed, sharp and brittle. "So I'm cursed to serve you, is that it? A Malfoy on a leash for the great Hermione Granger?" She didn't flinch. "No, you're not here to serve me. You're here because the magic knows something we don't. And if that sigil appeared on your arm today, it means the debt is calling, and we're going to find out why." The iron gates of Malfoy Manor groaned as they parted, a sound like old bones shifting beneath a heavy burden. Hermione stepped through, her boots sinking slightly into the damp gravel path. Autumn had draped itself over the estate in russet and gold, but the house loomed beyond the trees like a spectre wrapped in stone and silence. She hadn't wanted to come, not really, but the summons had been insistent, not from Draco, but from the magic itself, a pull in her blood she couldn't ignore, since the parchment had appeared on her desk, sealed with wax, the color of dried roses. She remembered the last time she'd stood here, bound, bruised, screaming into the dark. Bellatrix's laughter still echoed in her dreams sometimes, sharp as shattered glass. Her fingers twitched at her side, brushing the wand in her sleeve. Habit, protection, even now. The doors opened before she reached them. Draco stood framed in the archway, pale as ever, his hair pulled back, face unreadable. He wore no robes, just a charcoal coat over a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up to the elbows. No smirk, no sneer, just tired eyes, and a slight tilt of the head. "You came," he said. "I didn't have a choice." He stepped aside. "No, you didn't." She crossed the threshold, and the air changed. Colder, heavier, threaded, with something older than dust. Magic. Not dark, not light. ancient, the kind that seeped into walls and lingered in floorboards, whispering through generations. The entrance hall stretched before her, grander than she remembered, though stripped of its former opulence. The Malfoy crest still hung above the staircase, but the silver serpents were dulled, their eyes no longer gleaming with enchantment. Portraits lined the walls, some vacant, others watching her with thinly veiled disdain. One, an ancestor in a ruffled collar, muttered something in French before Draco silenced him with a sharp word. "This way," Draco said, leading her toward the east wing. "The library. It's where the oath first manifested." Hermione followed, her gaze darting to every shadow. The house remembered her. She could feel it, the brush of cold air where a curse had once scorched the wall, the faint scent of smoke beneath the mildew. But beneath it all, something new, pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath stone. "The oath," she said, voice low. "It's tied to something buried here, not just blood, intent, sacrifice." Draco paused at the library door. "My great-grandmother tried to erase it, burned half the archives in 1892, but oaths like this, they don't burn, they wait." He pushed the door open. Books lined the walls from floor to vaulted ceiling, many cracked, spines split with age. A long oak table dominated the center, covered in scrolls, inkwells, and a single open grimoire, bound in what looked like human skin. In the center of the table lay a shallow basin, carved from black stone, filled with a liquid that shimmered like mercury. Hermione approached slowly. "Is that blood?" Draco said. "Not fresh, not alive, but not dead either. It's been calling. To you, to me." She reached out, then hesitated. "Why me? Why now?" "Because your name was written into the vow," he said, voice quieter now. "Not just your bloodline. You, Hermione Jean Granger. By name, by fate. The oath knew you'd come back." She looked at him. "You didn't know." "No," he admitted. "I thought it was another debt, another chain. But this is different. It doesn't bind me to serve you. It binds me to protect you." Silence settled between them, thick and fragile. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A single leaf scraped against the windowpane. Hermione exhaled. "Then we'd better find out why." Dust hummed thick in the air of the Malfoy archives, swirling in slow eddies as the heavy oak door groaned shut behind them. The scent of old parchment and dried ink clung to the walls, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the iron chandeliers overhead. Hermione's fingers brushed the spine of a black-bound ledger, its cover etched with silver filigree that shimmered faintly under the candlelight. She didn't need to read the title to know this was the one. "This is it," she whispered, more to herself than to Draco. "The root of it all." He stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. The pale light caught the hollows beneath his eyes, shadows that hadn't been there a week ago. "You're certain?" She glanced back. "The runes on the frame, they're not decorative. They're a ward, a binding. I've seen variations in the Hall of Origins at the Ministry, but never this complete." Her fingertip traced the edge of the book, and the silver flared, warm and soft, like breath on glass. Draco stepped forward, slow, as if drawn against his will. "Touch it," he said, voice low. "I can't. Not yet. It's keyed to blood. Malfoy blood." He exhaled long and measured. Then, without another word, he drew his wand and slashed it across his palm. Hermione gasped, lunging forward, but he held up his hand, blood welling in the shallow cut. "Don't be dramatic," he muttered. "It's not the first time I've bled for this family's secrets." He pressed his palm flat against the cover. The ledger trembled. A pulse of light surged from the contact, rippling through the room like a breath from something long asleep. The candles flickered, and burned blue. The runes on the spine glowed crimson, and faded into a soft, steady gold. The click clicked in without sign like a sigh. Hermione held her breath as Draco withdrew his hand, wiping the blood on his robe with a grimace. She reached for the book again, this time without resistance. The cover was warm beneath her fingers, almost alive. She opened it slowly, the pages crackling with age and magic. The script was not ink, but light, silver runes etched into the parchment, shifting slightly as she read. They pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "It's in the old tongue," she murmured, predating the statute of secrecy. This is a pact. Read it aloud, Draco said, his voice tighter now, edged with something she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or dread. She began to translate, her voice hushed but steady. Star, by blood and bone, by oath unbroken, the first son of Malfoy shall serve the line of Granger when the moon turns black and the debt is called. No gold may pay it, no spell may break it. Only service, true, unbidden, and without pride, shall lift the weight of betrayal born in the year of the ashen winter. Star. A silence fell. Hermione turned the page. More runes, dense and spiraling. Star. In the time of fire, Lucian Malfoy swore fealty to Alara Granger, healer of the Veiled Village, in exchange for the life of his son. But when the plague passed, he broke his vow. He cast her out, he burned her home, and with her dying breath she wove a curse into the roots of his name. Until his blood serves hers with humility, his line shall know no peace. As Star, Draco's breath caught. Hermione looked up. Alara Granger. She was a witch, Draco said, voice rough. Not of noble blood, a healer. They said she was mad. Dangerous. He paused. My ancestors called her a traitor. And she cursed you, Hermione said softly. Not with death, with service. He turned away, staring at the shelves, at the centuries of pride stacked in leather and lies. We buried her name, called her a myth, but she was real. Hermione turned another page. A sketch emerged, faint but clear. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes, standing before a cottage wreathed in silver mist. Beneath it, a single line glowed. Star, the debt is not repaid until a heart kneels where the pride once stood. Star, she closed the book, gently. Draco didn't move. Outside, the sky darkened. Rain began to fall, tapping against the high windows like fingers testing a lock. And in that silence, something shifted, something older than magic, heavier than blood. Rain tapped a slow, steady rhythm against the high-arched windows of the Malfoy library, the kind of hush that only old stone could carry. Dust motes drifted in the pale light filtering through stained glass, catching on the spines of ancient tomes lined in meticulous order. Hermione Granger ran her fingers along the shelf, the tips brushing centuries of silence. The air smelled of parchment, dried sage, and something faintly metallic, old magic perhaps or memory. Draco stood by the hearth, arms crossed, his posture rigid. He hadn't wanted her here. He'd argued, sneered, even threatened to burn the records himself. But the oath had compelled him, a thrum beneath his skin like a pulse, not his own, and in the end he'd relented. Now he watched her with wary gray eyes, the ghost of boyhood scorn still lingering at the edges, though it had softened, not into warmth, not yet, but into something closer to reluctant acceptance. This one, she said suddenly, pulling a slim volume bound in cracked leather. It's not in any known dialect, not Latin, not Old English, but look at the sigils in the margin. She opened it gently, revealing delicate inkwork that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. It's a ward, a memory seal. Draco stepped closer, frowning. That belonged to Arion Malfoy, my ancestor. 7th generation, I think. He founded the estate proper, laid the wards, drained the marshes, built this house on cursed ground, some say. Hermione glanced up. Cursed how? He hesitated. Superstition, that he murdered a family to claim the land. A witch's line, the herewards. Her breath caught. Hereward. That's close. Coincidence, he said quickly, too quickly. But his fingers twitched at his side, betraying him. She turned the page. The ink shimmered, and suddenly the room seemed to dip. A cold draught where there had been none. The fire dimmed. Words began to bleed from the parchment, rising like smoke, forming shapes in the air. A scene unfolded. A woman in a grey cloak, standing in a field of tall grass. A man in Malfoy green approaching with drawn wand. Rain fell in silence. The woman raised her hands not in defense, but in offering. A vow spoken in a tongue long forgotten. A child wailing in the distance. Hermione stepped back. That's the oath. Draco's face had gone pale. No, that's impossible. The founding records were lost in the fire of 1723. Not lost, she whispered. Hidden, suppressed. She reached out and the image wavered, responding to her touch. She's not cursing him. She's binding him, through blood, through time. He swallowed. Why would she do that? Because he betrayed her. a new voice said. They turned. An old house elf stood in the doorway, trembling, large eyes wide with fear. "Dobby spoke of it once," the elf murmured. Before he passed. The Lady Hereward loved Master Arian. He swore to protect her, but the ministry was coming. She was to be tried for consorting with a pure blood. He gave her up, said she'd cursed him. They took her, burned her at the Wiltshire Stone. Hermione's stomach twisted. And the child? The elf looked down. She hid the babe, sent it away. But before she died, she wove the oath into the land, that every Malfoy born would serve her line until the debt was paid in truth, not gold, not land, but in sacrifice. Silence settled, thick and cold. Draco stared at the floor. All this time, we weren't the noble founders. We were thieves, murderers. Hermione closed the book slowly. The images faded, but the weight remained. The curse isn't on you, Draco. It's on the lie, and it's been waiting for someone to remember. He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time, she saw not pride, nor bitterness, but grief, deep and quiet, ancient. Outside, the rain fell harder. And beneath the stones of Malfoy Manor, something old stirred, not in anger, but in hope. The air in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the occasional flutter of a turning page. Moonlight bled through the high-arched windows, painting silver streaks across the ancient tomes stacked like forgotten sentinels. Draco stood beside Hermione, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He hadn't wanted to come back here, not to this place, not with her, but the oath binding him pulsed beneath his skin like a second heartbeat, cold and insistent. It had grown stronger since the last ritual, demanding answers, demanding movement. Hermione knelt before a stone plinth, her fingers tracing the edge of a cracked leather-bound book. "This is it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "The grimoire of bloodlines. It hasn't been opened in centuries." Draco scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "And you expect it to just speak star to you? This isn't a fairy tale, Granger. Old books don't give up their secrets to anyone who asks nicely." She didn't look at him. "No, but they respond to blood." He stiffened. "You don't mean—" Before he could protest, she pricked her thumb with a silver stylus and pressed it to the book's cover. The reaction was immediate. The grimoire shuddered, then split open with a sound like a sigh. Golden light spilled from its pages, curling upward like smoke, forming symbols in the air. Runes Draco had only seen in his father's most forbidden texts. Hermione read them aloud in a hushed, reverent tone, her voice trembling slightly. "Star, of the line of Malfoy, bound by oath, unbroken, sworn in fire, and sealed in blood, to serve the daughter of the wronged, until the doubt is paid, and the truth is known. Star." Draco's breath caught. That's the oath. But the light wasn't done. It twisted, reshaping into names. Dates, genealogies, unfolding like a tapestry. Hermione's finger traced one line upward, past her parents, past the quiet dentistry practice in Wimbledon, into something older, deeper. And then she stopped. Her face went pale. "What?" Draco demanded, stepping closer despite himself. Her voice was barely a whisper. "My mother's side, it's not mother-born, not entirely. There was a witch, Isolde Granger, born in 1583. She was accused of consorting with dark forces, but the records say she was framed." The light shifted again, showing a new scene, a man in Malfoy finery, his features sharp, familiar, too familiar. Draco recognized the crest on his doublet, Star Malfoy. "She was betrothed," Hermione continued, "to a Malfoy heir, Alistair Malfoy. He promised her protection, but when the witch hunts began in the north, he disavowed her, gave her name to the council. She was burned at the stake in Godric's Hollow." Draco staggered back. That can't be true. "There's no record." "There was," Hermione said, her eyes glistening. "It was erased, but blood remembers. The oath wasn't created. Star, it was broken. Star, Alistair swore loyalty to her, Draco, in magic older than wands. And when he betrayed her, the magic turned. It cursed his line to serve hers until the debt was repaid. The weight of it pressed down on him. Centuries of silence, of arrogance, of lies. His ancestors had spoken of purity, of power, but never of this. Never of the woman whose name had been scrubbed from history, whose blood still flowed in the woman standing before him. Hermione turned to him then, her gaze steady, searching. "You're not just bound to me because of some ancient magic, Draco. You're bound because your family destroyed mine. And now the magic wants balance." He looked away, throat tight. "And if I can't pay it, then it will consume you," she said softly. "Or worse, it'll consume someone else." Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. The book snapped shut, its light fading, leaving them in near darkness. Draco exhaled, long and slow. "I didn't know," he said at last. "No," she replied, "but you do now." The morning owl struck like a dagger through the window pane, rattling the glass before thudding onto Hermione's desk with a splash of ink. She looked up from her translation of the Sylvanus Codex, heart stuttering at the ministry seal. Not official, but unofficial, the kind sent by busybodies with too much time and too little tact. The note was brief, smudged at the edges as though written in haste. "Star, they say you're seen walking the halls with him, that he answers only to you. Is it true? Are you compromised?" "Star." She let the parchment fall, fingers trembling slightly. Not fear, never that, but a slow, simmering anger, hot and tight behind her ribs. It had started subtly, glances in the corridor that didn't look away, whispers that died when she turned, the way colleagues now hesitated before asking for her help. Even Kingsley's brow had furrowed the other day, when Draco had delivered a sealed scroll to her office, his posture stiff, his voice low. "Star, from the archive." As requested. Star, nothing more. Nothing improper. But the silence that followed his departure had been thick with implication. By midweek the rumors had taken root. At lunch in the atrium she caught two junior clerks huddled near the fountain, their heads bent. "Heard he sleeps in her flu annex now," one murmured. "Not sleeps," the other corrected, eyes wide, "guards it, like a hound." Hermione clenched her jaw and walked past, chin high, but the words coiled around her like smoke. Draco found her that evening in the restricted reading nook, a forgotten alcove buried beneath the Department of Mystery's old wing. Dust motes floated in the dim lamplight as she pored over a brittle ledger. Malfoy family tithes from the 1600s, possibly linked to the oath's first breach. He didn't knock, just stood in the shadow of the arch, pale as moonlight, hands tucked into the sleeves of his charcoal-gray robes. "They're saying I've bewitched you," he said flatly. She didn't look up. "They've said worse. Not about you." His voice dropped. "They think you've fallen into some old blood magic. That I'm influencing you." He paused. "Or worse." That made her glance at him. His jaw was tight, eyes guarded, but there was something beneath the cool mask. Shame, maybe, or the ghost of it. She closed the ledger slowly. "Let them talk. We both know. The truth is stranger than their rumors." "Is it?" He stepped forward, and the lamplight caught the silver in his hair. Not much, just a thread at the temple, but it startled her. He was still young, but the war had carved years into them all. "You've spent every night for weeks with me in these damned archives. You let me into your home when the curse flared. You're the only one who can summon me now, Hermione. Not by spell, but by something else." He didn't say star bond star, 5 command, but it hung between them, unspoken. She turned away, brushing dust from the ledger's spine. "It's not personal. It's research. The oath pulls you toward the Granger line. I'm the last. It's logic, not sentiment." The humorless smile tugged at his mouth. "And yet, you didn't hand me over to the ministry. You didn't chain me in a cell, though Merlin knows I'd have deserved it." He looked down at his hands. "You treat me like a man, not a monster. That's not logic. That's dangerous." Her breath caught. "Don't do that. Don't twist kindness into something it's not. Then tell me what it is." His voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "Because out there," he gestured toward the ministry levels above, "they're calling you compromised. They're saying the Malfoy curse has sunk its teeth into you. And the worst part," he met her eyes, "I don't know how to prove them wrong." She wanted to argue, to list the facts, the historical precedents, the magical mechanics of ancestral oaths. But the words dried in her throat. Because deep down, beneath duty and reason, she knew something had star-changed. Not because of magic, but because of the quiet nights spent side by side, the way he flinched at old family incantations, the way he'd handed her his mother's journal without hesitation, a gift of trust wrapped in silence. Outside, the ministry lights began to dim. Somewhere above, an owl hooted, and the first whispers of evening echoed down the stairwells. They stood in the hush, two figures wrapped in secrets, the past breathing down their necks, and for the first time, the truth felt heavier than the lie. The air in the attic of 1-2 Grimold Place tasted old, thick with dust, parchment, and the faint metallic tang of long-dormant magic. Moonlight bled through the grimy circular window, casting fractured silver across the worn floorboards and the open grimoire between them. Hermione knelt on the rug, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, wand in one hand and a quill in the other, scribbling notes in the margins of a page inscribed with looping, archaic script. Draco stood behind her, arms crossed, his jaw tight as he watched her work. "You're certain this incantation won't summon a poltergeist?" he asked, voice low. "It won't," she said, without looking up. "It's a resonance spell, designed to test magical compatibility. If the oath is still active, our magics will react." "React?" She hesitated. "I don't know, that's why we're testing." He exhaled through his nose. "Of course. Another one of your little experiments with no safety net. It's not star, little star, Draco. This oath has shaped your family for centuries. It bound your ancestors to mine. If it's still alive, truly alive, it's not just legal or ceremonial. It's star alive, star in our blood." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the book. "And if it's alive, what then? Do I kneel? Do I swear fealty? Do I, Merlin forbid, call you Star, Mistress Star?" She finally looked up, eyes sharp. "Don't be childish. This isn't about power. It's about obligation. And understanding. Same thing, in the end." She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her wand gently on the page, tip touching a sigil carved into the vellum. "Hold your wand over the same mark, and say the words with me." He glared at the book as if it had insulted him personally, but lowered himself to one knee beside her, his fingers curled around his hawthorn wand, cold and familiar. "This is absurd. Say the words, Draco." He muttered them under his breath. "Star, sanguis legatum, anima, iuncta, veritas revelata." "Star." She repeated them clearly, her voice rising in the stillness. The moment their voices merged, the sigil flared. A pulse of light burst from the page, not bright, but star, deep star. A shimmering gold threaded with silver, like sunlight through smoke. It coiled around their wands, then leapt upward, wrapping their arms in warm, electric bands. Hermione gasped. Draco tried to pull back, but his hand wouldn't obey. Their magic had tangled. It wasn't just linked, it was star, fused star, twining through their veins like ivy through stone. He could feel her breath before she took it, sense the flicker of thought behind her eyes. And she star knew, star him, not his thoughts, not words, but the weight of them. The shame of the manor, the hollowness after the war, the quiet, constant fear that he was still the boy who'd turned away when it mattered. She saw it all. And in return, he felt the ache behind her ribs when she remembered the Battle of Hogwarts, the loneliness of being the only one who remembered every spell, every choice, every life lost to a cause she'd believed in so fiercely. He felt her guilt, not for fighting, but for surviving. They were no longer two. They were a single current, a shared breath, a heartbeat, out of sync, but trying to match. "Hermione," he whispered, voice raw. "I know," she breathed. "I can feel you." The light deepened, humming now, vibrating in their bones. The grimoire trembled. Dust rained from the rafters. Somewhere downstairs a door slammed shut. And then, a crack, like ice breaking. They were thrown apart, landing hard on opposite sides of the room. The light vanished. The silence that followed was deafening. Draco pushed himself up on one elbow, chest heaving. His wand lay several feet away, tip blackened. Hermione sat curled forward, hands pressed to her temples. "What was that?" he managed. She looked at him, eyes wide, glistening. "It's not just an oath," she said softly. "It's a bond, already formed, already awake." He stared at his hands. They still tingled, as if touched by fire. "And us?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was barely a whisper. "We're connected, not by choice, not by law, by magic." She swallowed. "Draco, I think we've been bound all along. We just didn't know it yet." The air in the restricted section was thick with the scent of old parchment and dust, the kind that settled deep in the lungs and whispered of forgotten spells and buried truths. Moonlight bled through the high, arched windows, casting silver-gray patterns across the worn stone floor, illuminating motes that swirled like dormant magic. Draco stood just inside the threshold, his fingers twitching at his sides, unwilling to touch anything yet unable to look away. The books here didn't just contain knowledge. They held memory, breath, warnings. Hermione moved ahead, her steps quiet but certain. She carried a candle in one hand, its flame steady despite the draft that curled around the shelves like a cautious spirit. McGonagall said the oldest Malfoy records were here, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Not in the main archives, hidden. Draco's jaw tightened. She just handed you permission like it was a stack of potions notes. She didn't hand it, Hermione replied, glancing back. She asked me why I needed it. I told her the truth, or part of it, that ancient blood oaths were resurfacing, that we needed to understand the source. And she believed you? I think she suspected something like this might happen, Hermione said softly. The war changed things, Draco, not just lives. It cracked open old magic. Things that should have stayed buried, they've begun to stir. He didn't answer. He knew it was true. The oath had awakened the night of the winter solstice, when the wards around Malfoy Manor had pulsed with a dull, crimson light, and the ancestral mirror, silent for generations, had spoken in a voice, not its own. Star, the debt remains, the bond endures. Serve the blood you wronged. Star, he thought it a curse at first, a punishment. But the magic was older than Voldemort, older than the pure-blood mania his father had so fervently upheld. Hermione stopped before a narrow shelf tucked behind a crumbling statue of a robed witch with hollow eyes. She reached for a book bound in black leather, its surface etched with silver veins that shimmered faintly. "This is it," she whispered. "The Malfoy Oath Registry, PRE-1600. Draco stepped closer, his breath catching. The book hummed under her touch, a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the floor. That shouldn't be possible. That book was lost. My father said it burned during the purge. Your father was wrong, she said, carefully lifting it. Or lied. She carried it to a long oak table, its surface scarred with centuries of use. When she opened it, the pages didn't crackle. They sighed, as if relieved to be seen again. The ink swirled into shape before their eyes, forming elegant looping script that shifted between Latin and an older form of wizarding tongue. Draco leaned over her shoulder, reading aloud. "Star, by blood pledged, by blood bound, the Malfoy line shall serve the name of Granger, not by force, but by will, until the betrayal of the seventh heir is undone. Star," he paused. "Granger? That's impossible. The Granger name hasn't been in magical records for more than 3 centuries. Hermione turned the page slowly. Another passage emerged, this one accompanied by a faded illustration of 2 figures, one in Malfoy green, the other in deep russet robes marked with a crest. Draco didn't recognize. "It's not our Star Granger," she said, voice hushed. "It's a different line, a sister branch. My ancestors were just muggles. Draco, one of them, Alara Granger, was a witch, a powerful one, and she was engaged to a Malfoy." Draco stared at the image. The man's face was unmistakable, the sharp cheekbones, the proud tilt of the chin. His own face, centuries removed. "She was accused of dark magic," Hermione continued. "But the truth, look here." The ink reformed into a letter, sealed with wax that still bore the faint imprint of a serpent. Draco reached out, hesitated, then touched it. The wax melted, and the words unfolded in midair, spoken by a woman's voice, clear and sorrowful. "Star, Lucian, I did not betray you. Your father did. He bound me to silence, cursed my blood to wither if I spoke. I loved you, and for that I was buried alive in stone." Star, the voice faded. Draco stepped back, his face pale. "That's why the oath reawakened," Hermione said. "Because the truth was never known. Because the debt was never repaid." Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of centuries. Outside, the wind rustled through the whomping willow, a distant, living counterpoint to the stillness within. Draco looked at her, really looked at her. Not as an enemy, not as a symbol, but as the living echo of a woman who had loved and been destroyed. "I didn't know," he said, and for the first time, it wasn't an excuse. It was grief. Hermione closed the book gently. "Now you do." The attic of the old Granger house smelled of cedar and dust, sunlight filtering through the grimy dormer window in slanting beams that caught motes in the air like suspended magic. Hermione stood near the center, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, one poised. Draco stood opposite her, posture rigid, his jaw clenched just enough to betray his discomfort. "Wards aren't about force," she said, voice low and steady. "They're about intent. You're not pushing magic outward. You're shaping it, like glass blowing. Gentle pressure, precision." He exhaled sharply through his nose. "And if I shape it wrong, then the ward collapses. Or worse, it backfires. Last week you nearly turned my teacup into a nesting measle. I'd prefer we avoid another incident." A faint smirk tugged at his lips. It was mildly entertaining. Not for Mrs. Norris. It wasn't. They both fell quiet, the memory of the agitated cat skittering up the bookshelves, with tiny birds chirping from her fur, still fresh. Draco flexed his fingers around his wand. Walnut, dragon heartstring, 12 inches, a recent replacement after the old one shattered during a failed ritual. Hermione had acquired it through a discreet contact in Diagon Alley, no questions asked. "Again," she said, "start with the boundary incantation, star finis lamina star, then layer in the ward form. Remember, it's not a wall. It's a net. Let the magic breathe." He nodded, closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them with startling clarity. "Star finis lamina. Star." The words were soft, deliberate, and a shimmering line of silver light traced a circle around them on the floorboards. Hermione watched, arms crossed, as he raised his wand in a slow arc, whispering secondary charm. The net appeared, gossamer thin, crisscrossing the space above them like a spider's web, spun from moonlight. For a moment, it held. Then a ripple passed through it, and the threads frayed at the edges. "Almost," she said. "You hesitated on the third knot. I felt it tear. You're overthinking. Your magic's responding to tension. Relax your wrist." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "Easy for you to say. You've had a lifetime of getting things right, and you've spent yours making sure no one saw you struggle." The words slipped out before she could stop them. His expression flickered. Surprise, then something softer, quickly masked. A pause. The attic settled around them, the silence filled only by the distant caw of a crow outside. "Show me," he said. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside him. "Like this." She lifted her wand, mirroring his earlier motions, but slower, letting him see the subtle twist of the wrist, the breath timed with the syllables. "Star finis lamina. Star." The boundary formed, clean and bright. Then, with a fluid motion, she wove the ward net, her magic flowing like water over stone. It held. Draco studied it, not with envy, but with quiet focus. "You don't force it," he murmured. "You invite it." Hermione turned to him, surprised. "Yes, exactly." He tried again. This time the net shimmered into place without fraying. It pulsed faintly, steady and strong. She smiled. "You did it." He didn't answer at first. Instead he reached out, just slightly, his hand passing through the ward. A soft chime rang in the air, and the threads glowed brighter where he touched them. "It recognizes me," he said, voice low. Hermione's breath caught. That wasn't supposed to happen. Wards didn't recognize bloodlines unless they were keyed to ancestral magic. "And that's not possible," she whispered. But Draco didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "The oath," he said. "It's not just binding me to your family, is it? It's rewriting the rules." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old window pane. Inside, the ward hummed, alive with something older than either of them understood. The rain had begun just before dusk, a slow, insistent drizzle that turned the gravel path to slush and blurred the edges of the Malfoy estate like a smudged charcoal sketch. Draco stood at the study window, a glass of untouched brandy in hand, watching the silver glint of the wards flicker under the storm's pressure. He hadn't expected visitors. Not tonight, not ever, really. The manor had grown quiet in the years since the war, too quiet sometimes, as though the walls remembered too much and chose silence out of shame. Then the front gate chimed, a sound so rare it made his fingers twitch. He recognized her silhouette before the door opened, small, cloaked in midnight blue, her pale hair pulled back with a ribbon the color of dried violets. Astoria, his wife, his ghost. She stepped into the foyer, water dripping from the hem of her cloak, her face carefully composed, but her eyes held the quiet storm he knew too well. "You're still living in this mausoleum," she said, voice soft, almost sad. "It's my inheritance," he replied, offering no embrace, no warmth. "Unlike some, I never chose to walk away from it." She removed her gloves, slowly placing them on the side table, as if testing the weight of the air. "I'm not here to argue about choices, Draco. I'm here because the wards whispered your name today, not in warning. In star fear star, Omedi." He turned away, pouring her a drink without asking. "The wards are old, they dream. They dream of star her star. Starius' son, Astorius turking a was. But not sipping. Hermione Granger. You've let her into the West Library. You've shared the family grimoires. You're speaking to her as an equal. And one of it." His voice was sharper than he intended. "She's the only one who understands the oath's syntax. The blood binding, it's not just Malfoy magic. It's older, deeper. Our ancestors didn't just serve star the Grangers. They swore star to them. And now the magic remembers." Astoria stepped closer, her gaze sharp, searching. "You don't understand what you're playing with. That oath, it's not just duty, it's a key, and she holds the lock." He laughed, brittle. "You sound like a prophet from a bad novel." "I sound like a woman who read the true star histories," she snapped, then lowered her voice. "Before I married you, before I swore to keep your family's secrets, there's a reason the Malfoys never allied with the Grangers, even when blood pacts were common. There's a curse woven into that oath, older than Hogwarts. If you grow close to her, truly star close, the magic will demand balance, sacrifice. And it won't take your life, Draco. It'll take your star-line star." The room stilled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she whispered, "that if your heart begins to beat for her, if the magic senses star affection, star, needs star, it will cut the Malfoy bloodline at the root. No heirs, no legacy, just silence. That she will be the one to inherit what remains. Your magic, your name, your star power star, unmade, reshaped in her hands." Draco stared into the fire, the brandy suddenly sour in his mouth. He thought of Hermione's hands, ink-stained and sure, tracing runes on parchment with a reverence that unsettled him. The way she looked at him, not with hatred, not anymore, but with something dangerously close to understanding. "We're just researching," he said, but his voice wavered. Astoria touched his arm, a ghost of the tenderness they once shared. "Then stay in the realm of research. Don't let her see the man beneath the mask. Don't let her star you. Because if she does, the oath won't just bind you, it will consume you. And I will not bury what's left of us." The air in the hidden chamber beneath the Malfoy library was thick with the scent of old parchment and damp stone, the silence broken only by the faint crackle of enchanted blue flames in the sconces along the curved walls. Hermione stood with her back straight, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the obsidian plinth at the room's center. The rooms pulsed faintly beneath her touch, responding to her presence, to the name etched in blood and memory, Granger. Draco stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his jaw tight. He had protested this. Of course he had. "This is madness," he'd said, voice low, and edged with something sharper than fear. "Old magic doesn't just wake up because you ask star it to." But they both knew it wasn't about asking. The oath had already chosen its moment. The dreams had come, fragmented, feverish, images of fire, of a woman with Hermione's eyes, screaming our language. Neither of them understood. And then the book, hidden behind a false panel in the Malfoy ancestral ledger, its pages filled with a script that shifted under candlelight, whispering of blood debts and broken vows. Now the ritual circle was drawn in powdered silver and hawthorn ash. A single candle burned at each cardinal point, their flames unnaturally still. Between them lay 2 daggers, one silver, etched with the Malfoy crest, the other iron, older, its handle worn smooth by time and use. The Granger blade, Hermione had realized with a chill, though no one in her family had ever spoken of it. "Don't know what this will show us," Noah squoze her face. His voice quieter now. "What if it's a trap?" "It's not a trap," she replied, not turning. "It's a memory. The magic wants to be seen. That's why it woke, because the debt is still unpaid, and the truth is buried." He exhaled sharply. "And if we don't like what we see, then we face it anyway." She picked up the iron dagger. The moment her palm closed around it, a jolt ran up her arm, sharp and cold. Draco hesitated, then reached for the silver blade. As his fingers curled around the hilt, the runes on the plinth flared, bright, then deeper, sinking into the stone like ink and water. They stepped into the circle. The air shimmered. The flames bent inward, then snapped upward in unison, forming a column of swirling light. A low hum filled the chamber, rising in pitch until it vibrated in their bones. Hermione felt the world tilt, not in space, but in time, and then they were elsewhere. A forest at twilight, ancient oaks arching overhead, their leaves whispering in a wind that carried the scent of moss and iron. A stone altar stood in a clearing, cracked and stained. Before it 2 figures struggled, a man in dark robes, his face half hidden by a hood, and a woman in simple linens, her hands bound with silver thread. "That's him," Draco whispered. "Corvus Malfoy." "Ancestor," the man, Corvus, spoke, his voice smooth, almost kind. "You must understand, Elspeth, it was never personal. Your gift, it belongs to those who can wield it with purpose, not wasted on healing, on Star, Mercy's star." Elspeth spat as his fort. "Loyalty to the Accord, or family stood together, and now you steal what was never yours." He smiled. "I don't steal. I star claim star. The power passes through blood, and yours will flow into mine." He raised a dagger, the silver one, and in that moment, Hermione saw it. Not murder, not force, a ritual, a binding. He cut her palm, then his own, pressing their hands together over the altar. The ground trembled. A pulse of dark light erupted, and Elspeth screamed, not in pain but in loss, as something invisible tore from her chest and vanished into Corvus. Draco staggered. That's not how it was recorded. The history said she died in battle." "She didn't die," Hermione said, voice hollow. "She was drained. The magic taken, and your ancestor, he lied. He broke the oath sworn between our families. He stole her gift to strengthen his bloodline." The vision faded, the forest dissolving into mist. But the scream lingered, echoing in the silence that followed. Draco dropped the dagger. It clattered against the stone. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Pale, familiar, suddenly foreign. "I didn't know," he said, barely audible. Hermione watched him, the weight of centuries pressing between them. "Now you do." The air in the Malfoy ancestral library was thick, with the scent of old parchment and damp stone, a silence broken only by the occasional rustle of turning pages and the soft scratch of Hermione's quill. Dust motes drifted in the narrow beams of afternoon light that slipped through the high, narrow windows, catching on the spines of ancient tomes bound in cracked leather and iron clasps. Draco stood by the hearth, arms crossed, watching her with a quiet intensity he didn't bother to disguise. She could feel it, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken question that had hung between them since they'd discovered the first fragmented scroll in the walled garden 3 days prior. "It's not just an oath," Hermione murmured, not looking up. "It's woven into the land itself. The boundary markers, the standing stones around the edge of the estate, they are decorative, Draco. They're wards, anchors. Draco's jaw tightened. And you're certain of this? She finally lifted her eyes, meeting his. Look at the runes. They're not Malfoy. Not entirely. There's older magic here, predating your family's claim. The Malfoys didn't build on this land. They took it, and the magic remembers. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, and the candle flames flickered. For a moment the shadows seemed to deepen, stretching across the floor like grasping fingers. Draco stepped closer, his boots silent on the worn rug. You're saying the curse was already here? That we awakened it? No, she said softly. I think you bound yourselves to it. The original oath, your ancestors promised to serve the blood that was wronged. It wasn't just symbolic. It was sealed with earth, with roots, with bone. He went very still. What are you talking about? Hermione turned the brittle page with care, revealing a charcoal sketch of a figure, kneeling before a stone altar, hands pressed into dark soil. Around them, figures in hooded robes formed a circle. This ritual, the binding of birth and oath, it required physical communion with the land. The vower had to offer a piece of themselves, not just blood, but a vow star sworn into the soil star. The land becomes the witness, the keeper. Draco stared at the image. So when my ancestor made that oath, he didn't just speak it, he buried it. In a manner of speaking, she said, the magic took root, literally, and when you by blood and name return to this place, the oath reawakened, not because of intent, but because the land recognized your blood. It remembered the debt. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. And the Granger name, it's tied to this. Hermione hesitated. Not Granger, not originally. The name in the text. It's different. Older. Star Gwydryn Star. He frowned. That's not a Welsh root, she said. It means of the trees, or wood spirit, I think. I think my ancestors were stewards here. Before the Malfoys came. Before the purge of non-pure blood families in the area. They were erased from records, but not from the land. The silence that followed was heavy, layered with centuries of buried truth. Draco looked out the window, toward the distant line of ancient oaks that marked the edge of the property. So all this time the land has been waiting. For someone to acknowledge the debt, she said. Not to fulfill it with servitude, but with reckoning star. He turned to her, then, something raw in his eyes, something that wasn't pride, wasn't defiance. It was closer to grief. And if we don't, if we walk away, the magic won't release us, she whispered. It'll grow stronger. The dreams, the whispers in the garden, the way the ivy curls toward the house every spring. It's not random. The land is pulling us back. Pulling you star back. Until the balance is restored. Draco closed his eyes. For the first time since they'd begun this search, he looked not like a reluctant ally, but like a man standing at the edge of a truth too vast to ignore. And how, he asked, voice barely above a breath, do we restore something we never knew was broken? The fire had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the ancient tones, stacked like fragile sentinels on the oak table. Outside, a November wind keened through the eaves of the Granger cottage, rattling the window panes with the persistence of a forgotten ghost. Hermione stirred the dregs of her tea, long gone cold, her eyes scanning the same paragraph for the third time without comprehension. The words blurred, Aramaic script translated into archaic English, something about blood oaths and lunar alignments, but her mind kept returning to the man across from her. Draco sat with his back to the hearth, one knee drawn up, his pale fingers tracing the gilded spine of a crumbling ledger. A single candle guttered beside him, catching the silver in his hair, the sharp angle of his jaw. He looked less like a Malfoy now, less like the boy who'd sneered at her in the corridors of Hogwarts, and more like someone carved from moonlight and silence. You know, she said, voice softer than intended, I never thought I'd see you voluntarily reading anything older than a Quidditch magazine. He didn't look up. And I never thought I'd be reading at all in a Muggle-born sitting room, let alone one who smells faintly of peppermint and parchment. She snorted, an ungraceful surprise sound that startled a laugh out of him. It was short, almost wary, but real. The kind that cracked through tension like ice underfoot. Hermione covered her mouth, cheeks warming. "I do not smell like parchment." "You do," he said, finally lifting his eyes. There was no malice in them, only amusement, and something else. Something hesitant. "It clings to you, like ink to skin." She should have bristled, should have tossed back a retort about his own scent. Sandalwood, and frost and something faintly metallic like old silver. But the room felt too still, too close. The laughter still hummed between them, fragile as a soap bubble. She pushed her chair back, standing to stretch. "We've been at this for hours, and we're no closer to understanding why your ancestor pledged fealty to my great-great-grandmother during the Paris witch trials." Draco closed the ledger. Because wizards weren't supposed to fall in love with Muggle scholars, especially not ones who could read the Veiled Codex. Right, forbidden knowledge, forbidden love. She sighed. "And now we're stuck untangling their mess. Not star we star," he said quietly. "Me, I'm the one bound by it." She turned to face him. "Don't you see? If the oath awakened now, it's because star something changed star. Maybe it's not just about your blood. Maybe it's about us." He stilled. "Us? Not star a star," she corrected quickly. "Our presence, our proximity. Magic like this, it feeds on resonance, on history repeating." She stood lowly, the candlelight deepening the shadows beneath his eyes. "And if it is about us, what then?" The air thickened. The fire snapped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I don't know," she admitted, "but every time we touch the same book, the ink shifts. Did you notice that? As if the magic recognizes both of us." He stepped closer, not close enough to touch, but near enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his storm-colored eyes. "Maybe it's not the books. Maybe it's us touching star each other. Star prophet." Her breath caught. They had brushed hands twice that evening. Once reaching for the same volume, once when he steadied her elbow, as she stumbled over a loose floorboard. Both times, the air had shimmered, just for a second, like heat over stone. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" He reached out, not toward her, but to the book between them. He opened it. She did the same. Their fingers grazed. The pages glowed. Soft golden light pulsed from the spine, words rearranging themselves before their eyes. Latin script reforming into English, clear and undeniable. "Star, when the lion and the serpent speak as one, the debt shall stir, and the oath shall name its heir." Star. Hermione pulled her hand back as if burned. Draco exhaled sharply. "Well, that's new." She looked at him, heart-pounding. "We weren't supposed to be able to do that, not unless we're both part of it," he finished. The wind outside stilled. The candle flared once, then died. And in the darkness, neither of them moved. The candle flickered once, then died. Draco barely noticed. His fingers trembled over the brittle parchment, tracing the looping script of the ancient Malfoy oath. Words he had only just begun to understand. Ink faded to the color of dried blood. The library around him was silent, wrapped in the hush that came after midnight, the air thick with dust and the quiet musk of old magic. Hermione stood across the table, her brow furrowed, murmuring incantations under her breath as she tested the wards surrounding the document. "It shouldn't be active," she said, more to herself than to him. "This kind of ancestral magic requires lineage, yes, but also intent. Someone had to reactivate it." Draco didn't answer. His chest felt tight, as though an invisible hand had slipped beneath his ribs and was slowly closing its grip. He stared at the sigil at the bottom of the page, the Malfoy crest, but twisted, its serpent coiled around a broken chain, mouth open in a silent scream. He'd never seen it before. "Hermione," he said, voice low. She looked up. Something in his tone made her still. Before she could speak, the room trembled, not with sound, but with pressure, like the moment before thunder breaks. The candles flared blue, then black. The parchment glowed, pulsing once with a sickly light that made Draco's veins ache. "Don't touch it," Hermione shouted. But it was too late. The magic burst from the page like a scream given form. It struck Draco in the chest, throwing him backward. He crashed into the bookshelves, ancient tomes raining down around him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His body locked, rigid as visions flooded his mind. Not memories, not dreams, but something older, deeper. The magic wasn't just showing him the past, it was forcing him to live it. He saw his great-grandfather, Arcturus Malfoy, standing in a moonlit grove, wand outstretched. A woman knelt before him, dark hair, proud face, eyes blazing with defiance. A Granger. The name whispered through Draco's mind, like wind through dead leaves. Arcturus spoke words in a language older than Parseltime, binding magic woven with spite and fear. The woman screamed as chains of light wrapped around her wrists, her magic torn from her in ribbons. Then another vision. His grandfather, Abraxas, burning a journal in the hearth, face pale. A child's cry echoed from upstairs. A son, born with no magic. A punishment. Again, Lucius, younger, standing in the ministry archives, sealing a pact, not with the Dark Lord, but with something older, something hungry. He offered blood, offered loyalty, offered the future. And then, Draco himself, at the manor, wand in hand, Bellatrix laughing, Hermione screaming. No, he gasped, but the word had no sound. The visions kept coming, layer upon layer, each one a stone added to a tomb he hadn't known he was building. He felt every lie, every silence, every moment he had stood by and done nothing. The weight of it crushed him. In the library, Hermione was at his side, gripping his shoulders. "Draco, Draco, open your eyes." But he couldn't. He was falling. He saw the curse take root, a black vine threading through generations, blooming only when guilt reached its peak. The oath wasn't just service. It was penance, and it had chosen him. The last thing he felt before the darkness took him was a hand, small, warm, closing around his. Then nothing. Silence. The candles remained unlit. The parchment smoldered at the edges, the ink now fresh, as though newly written. And Draco Malfoy lay still, breath shallow, heart beating like a trapped bird. Somewhere beneath the surface, the past was not done with him. The air in the Malfoy library was thick with the scent of old parchment, and something sharper. Ozone, perhaps, or the metallic tang of magic, straining at its seams. Moonlight bled through the tall arched windows, casting long skeletal shadows across the floor. Hermione stood at the edge of a circle, drawn in salt and ash, her wand clutched tightly in one hand, the other pressing against the cold stone of the summoning plinth. Draco lay within the circle, motionless, his face pale as bone, lips moving soundlessly. The ancient incantation had worked, too well. He had slipped into the dreamscape, a realm woven from ancestral memory and blood magic, and now he wasn't coming back on his own. She had read about it in the Black Family grimoire, tucked between crumbling pages on blood oaths and spectral binding. To enter the dreamscape of another was to walk through the ruins of their lineage, to hear the whispers of the dead. It was dangerous, suicidal, even. But she had no choice. His breath was growing shallow, his pulse fluttering like a trapped bird beneath her fingers when she checked. The curse was pulling him under, feeding on his guilt, his regrets, the weight of generations he never asked to inherit. Hermione stepped into the circle. The world folded. One moment she stood in the library. The next she was walking through a corridor of mist and memory. Towering oaks loomed like sentinels, their roots entwined with silver veins of magic. The sky above was neither day nor night, but a bruised purple, streaked with threads of gold that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Voices rose from the fog, whispers in a language half forgotten, yet somehow familiar. Old Malfoy voices, proud, cold, pleading. And then, her name, Hermione. She froze. The voice was not Draco's. It was older, fractured, yet threaded with sorrow. It came again, softer this time, like wind through dead leaves. "Hermione, daughter of debt, you should not be here." She turned, wand raised, but saw nothing, only the shifting mist, the skeletal trees. Then, between the trunks, a figure emerged, translucent, robed in tattered green silk, his face a mirror of Draco's, yet aged by centuries. Lucius Malfoy. No, not him. Older. Ancestor. His eyes were hollow, yet they fixed on her with unnerving clarity. "You bear her face," he said. "Not the blood, but the fire. She was the one who tried to break the chain." "Who?" Hermione asked, voice steady. Despite the chill, crawling up her spine. The first Granger who crossed the line, not by birth, but by choice. She loved a Malfoy, and for that they cursed her bloodline to forget. But the magic remembers. A cold dread settled in her chest. The oath wasn't just about service. It was about love. About betrayal. Behind the spectre, the mist coiled, forming new shapes. Shadows of women in long gowns, their hands outstretched, mouths open in silent screams. One stepped forward. Dark hair, fierce eyes. Hermione's breath caught. She looked like her mother. "No," the ancestor whispered. "She tried to save us, but the curse demands balance. A life for a life, a love denied for a love betrayed." "I don't want balance," Hermione said, stepping forward. "I want Draco back. He is not lost yet, but he walks the path of atonement. To return, he must face what his blood has done. And you must decide if you can forgive what cannot be undone." The ground trembled. The sky cracked. And between the trees, Draco appeared, kneeling, hands bound in chains of light, his face twisted in anguish. "Hermione," he gasped. I didn't know they burned her." She ran to him, dropping to her knees, reaching through the spectral chains. Her fingers passed through his, but she felt the heat of his pain, the weight of centuries pressing down. "You're not responsible for their sins," she said, voice breaking. "Let me take you home." The whispers rose again, louder now. A chorus of voices mourning, warning, pleading. And beneath it all, the curse breathed her name once more. "Hermione, the debt is not paid. Not yet." The air in the hidden chamber beneath the ruins of Malfoy Manor was thick with dust and the scent of old parchment, so dense it clung to the back of Draco's throat. He coughed once, low and sharp, as Hermione's wand-light flickered over stone shelves carved directly into the earth. Her breath came slow and quiet, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly around her wand. They had been searching for weeks, through charred family records, forgotten wards, whispered legends in crumbling tomes, and now at last they stood before it. A book lay on a slate pedestal, its cover bound in what looked like bleached dragon hide, too pale to be natural. Silver runes spiraled across its surface, pulsing faintly, like a slow heartbeat beneath the skin. Hermione stepped forward, then hesitated. "This is it," she whispered. "The Grimoire of Reversal. I've only ever read about it in forbidden annotations, supposedly destroyed during the purges." Draco didn't answer. His forearm burned beneath his sleeve, the old Malfoy oath mark a dull throb since they'd crossed the threshold. It had flared brighter the closer they drew, as if the magic within recognized its master, or its prisoner. She reached out, then paused. "There's a protection charm, blood-based. It could be keyed to your line." "My blood?" he asked, voice flat. "Likely, but if it's hostile it could drain you. Or worse." He exhaled through his nose, stepping forward. "Then let's find out." Before she could protest, he drew his wand and sliced a shallow cut across his palm. Blood welled, dark in the dim light. He pressed his hand against the cover. The runes ignited. A wind roared through the chamber, though there was no opening, no source. The grimoire trembled, then opened on its own, pages fanning like the wings of some ancient bird waking from sleep. The air filled with whispers, voices layered over centuries, speaking in a dialect even Hermione struggled to place. She leaned in, eyes wide. "It's a litany of debts, names, dates, Malfoy after Malfoy. And Granger?" Draco frowned. "That's not possible. Your family wasn't even in Britain until the 18th century. "Exactly," she murmured. "But here it is, written in blood ink. Star, Ilara Granger, bound by fire, debt, unbroken." Star, he touched the page carefully, and the name shimmered. "There's a counter-curse embedded in the oath, a reversal. But it requires both our blood, willingly given, to activate." He stared at her. "You're saying the ritual doesn't just release me. It could break the entire curse, the one that started this, the one that Star created, Star the Oath." "Yes," she said softly. "But it's dangerous. The magic here isn't benevolent. It feeds on sacrifice. If we're wrong, if either of us hesitates, the backlash could kill us. Or worse, bind us more tightly." Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of the grimoire. The weight of it pressed on Draco, the weight of his ancestors, their pride, their cruelty. He thought of his mother, who had never spoken of this, who had looked at him sometimes with something like sorrow in her eyes. He thought of the war, of the choices he had made, the ones he hadn't. And he thought of Hermione, how she had not turned him away when the oath first flared to life, how she had studied ancient wards instead of calling the ministry, how she had looked at him just yesterday, not with pity, but with something like understanding. "I'm tired," he said, voice rough, of owing, of being haunted. She met his gaze. "Then let's end it." They stood on either side of the pedestal. She took out her own knife, a small silver blade from her satchel, and without flinching cut her palm. Their blood dripped onto the open page, mingling in a slow, dark spiral. The chamber trembled. The whispers rose to a chant, and the book began to write anew. The air in the hidden chamber beneath the Malfoy library tasted of damp stone and old iron, thick with the scent of extinguished candles and the faint coppery tang of blood. Moonlight seeped through cracks in the ancient wards, casting fractured silver lines across the black marble floor where Hermione knelt, her fingers tracing the final sigil of the blood exchange. The circle pulsed faintly beneath her touch, runes flaring like embers in the dark. Draco stood across from her, pale as parchment, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. A thin cut ran along his forearm, already healing, but the magic had taken its due. He watched her with something unreadable in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also a quiet awe, as if he were witnessing the unraveling of a curse he'd carried since birth, without knowing its shape. "This is irreversible," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Once the blood binds, there's no unmaking it, not without death." Hermione met his gaze. "We've already crossed that line, Draco. The oath chose you. It's already feeding on your bloodline. This is the only way to balance it, to give it what it wants without losing ourselves." She lifted her wand, then hesitated. The ritual demanded equal sacrifice, equal measure of will, pain and intent. Not just blood, but choice. Consent given in full knowledge of consequence. "Say it," she whispered. He exhaled sharply. "I, Draco Lucius Malfoy, of the line of House Malfoy, freely offer my blood, not in service born of compulsion, but in reparation. I name no master. I claim no dominion. I give this debt willingly, that the old wrongs may be answered." Her breath caught. That wasn't in the incantation. He had rewritten it, reframed servitude as atonement, a defiance buried in surrender. "And I," she said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands, "Hermione Jean Granger, of no ancient house but of my own will and blood, accept this offering, not as heir to vengeance, but as keeper of balance. I bind not to rule, but to witness, to remember, to forgive, where forgiveness is earned." The moment the words left her lips, the circle ignited. A wave of heat surged between them, not fire but something deeper, older. It wrapped around their arms like invisible vines, drawing them forward until their bleeding wrists touched. The pain was sharp, electric, but brief. Then came the pull, the slow, inexorable draw, as their blood mingled, not just on skin, but in something deeper, something beneath the bone. Images flickered behind Hermione's eyes. A torch-lit hole, a woman in a long dark robe placing a dagger into the hands of a young wizard, with silver blonde hair. "Star, you swore in blood," Star, the woman said, her voice echoing with power. "Star, and so shall it be until the blood answers. Star." Then silence, then fire. Draco gasped, staggering back, but the bond held. He saw a girl, not much older than 11, standing alone on a train platform, her fists clenched, her heart full of fury and promise. He felt it, the weight of every sneer, every cruel word he'd thrown like stones, and beneath it, something else, regret, not for himself, but for her. The chamber trembled. The ruse flared white, then dimmed, the air stilled. They were still kneeling, hands clasped, breath ragged. The cut on their arms had sealed, leaving only a thin silver line, a scar neither had worn moments before. Draco looked down at their joined hands, then up at her. "I can feel you," he said, quiet, stunned. "Not your thoughts, but your presence. Like a thread beneath my skin." She nodded, throat tight. "Me too. It's not control, it's connection." He didn't let go. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the wards, pale gold brushing the stone. The ancient magic had been answered, not broken, but transformed. The debt was not erased. It had simply changed hands, passed from shadow into light, carried now not by obligation, but by something neither of them had expected. Something fragile, something new. The air in the abandoned wing of Malfoy Manor was thick with dust, and the scent of old parchment, but beneath it all hung something sharper, magic, ancient and coiled like a serpent beneath stone. Moonlight spilled through the cracked stained glass, painting fractured constellations across the stone floor, one beam falling directly onto the open page of the grimoire between them. Hermione's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the incantation, her breath shallow. Draco stood beside her, his usual composure frayed at the edges, the silver in his hair catching the pale light like frost. "This only works if we're both willing," she said, voice low. "Not under coercion, not by force. We have to choose it." "I didn't survive the war just to be bound by another oath," he said, jaw tight. "Not to you." She turned to face him then, the moonlight softening the lines of her face, but not the fire in her eyes. "Then walk away, Draco. No one's stopping you. But if you do, the curse stays. And next time it awakens, next time it demands payment, it might not just take your magic, it could take your life." He exhaled sharply, a sound caught between a scoff and a surrender. His gaze dropped to the book, to the archaic script that pulsed faintly under their combined presence. The oath had chosen her, Hermione Granger, the girl who once punched him in a corridor, just as it had once claimed his ancestor. The irony wasn't lost on him, but irony wouldn't stop the curse from flaying them both alive. "What happens if we fail?" he asked. "Then we die," she said simply. "Or worse. We become vessels. The magic will twist us, use us to settle debts we didn't create." A silence settled between them, filled only by the distant hoot of an owl, and the whisper of wind through the broken window. Somewhere deep in the manor, a floorboard groaned, as though the house itself was listening. Draco looked at her, really looked. At the smudge of ink on her wrist, the way her hair refused to be tamed even now, the quiet strength in her posture. He remembered her standing before the Wiesengamot, defending former enemies. He remembered her voice on the battlefield, steady even when everything burned. "I never thought I'd stand here," he said, "with you, saying these words." "Neither did I," she admitted. "But we're here, and this is what we have to do." He nodded once, then extended his hand, palm up. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Their fingers didn't interlace, they weren't that far gone, but the contact sent a jolt through them both, as though the magic had been waiting for this exact moment. Together, they began the incantation. Their voices wove together, uneven at first, hers clear and precise, his rough with reluctance, then gradually synchronizing, syllables falling into rhythm like a heartbeat restored. The air grew heavy, charged. The moonlight intensified, pooling around their joined hands, the grimoire glowing now, runes lifting from the page like smoke. A pressure built in their chests, deep and insistent, as if something ancient was waking, watching, judging. The floor trembled, the shadows along the walls stretched and pulsed, forming shapes, figures in long cloaks, faces half-remembered, eyes full of sorrow and accusation. The ancestors, the betrayed, the ones who started this. Hermione's breath caught. Draco's grip on her hand tightened. "Don't stop," she whispered. They continued, voices rising. The counter-curse wasn't a spell of destruction. It was one of balance, of acknowledgement. It required truth. It required tracks. Dyke wiled suddenly from their palms, thin lines appearing as if cut by invisible blades. Crimson dripped onto the book, sizzling as it met the parchment. The magic surged, a wave of silver-blue light erupting from the grimoire and wrapping around them like a cocoon. For a moment they were weightless, and then silence. The light faded. The book snapped shut. The shadows retreated. They stood there, hands still joined, breathing hard. The air was different now, cleaner, lighter. It had worked, or at least it had begun. Rain tapped against the study window in a slow, maddening rhythm, each drop like a needle piercing the silence between them. Hermione lay curled on the chaise, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, her breath shallow and uneven. The candlelight flickered across her face, casting deep shadows beneath her eyes, turning her skin the color of old parchment. Draco stood by the hearth, one hand braced against the mantel, staring into the dying embers as if they might offer answers. He hadn't wanted her to do it. He'd argued, pleaded even, words that still tasted foreign on his tongue. But Hermione Granger had always been stubborn, and when she believed in something, no amount of logic or warning could steer her away. The ritual had worked. He could feel the oath shift within him, not broken, but altered, lighter, somehow. As though the chains binding his blood to hers had loosened by a single crucial link. But the cost, Merlin, the cost. She stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips. "Draco?" He turned. "You shouldn't speak. I'm fine." Her voice was a ghost of itself. "You're not." He moved to her side, crouching so their eyes were level. "You nearly didn't wake up. It was necessary." She tried to smile, but it faltered. The incantation required a willing sacrifice, someone of pure intent to offer their vitality. There was no one else. "There was me." His voice cracked. "I'm the one bowed to this curse. I should have been the one to pay. And what good would that do?" she whispered. "If you'd collapsed, who would have completed the counter-charm? Who would have anchored the magic?" She reached out, his fingers brushing his wrist. "You think I don't know what this costs you, the guilt, the shame. But this isn't just about you, Draco. It's about both our families, what they did, what they refused to face. This magic doesn't care about pride. It demands balance." He looked away, jaw clenched. The fire popped, sending a spiral of ash into the air. "You could have died, but I didn't." A pause, and the sigil. Did it change? He hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve. The ancient Malfoy mark on his inner forearm. Once a stark black serpent coiled around a dagger, now shimmered faintly, its edges blurred, the lines softening into something almost silver. "It's responding. The debt isn't cleared, but it's diminishing, because of you." She exhaled, as if relieved. "Then it was worth it." "No." The word came out sharp, raw. "Nothing is worth this. Not some dusty oath, not ancestral pride, not even redemption. Not your life." He caught her hand, holding it tightly. "Do you hear me? Not your life." She stared at him, surprised by the intensity. Then quietly, "You've changed. I've had no choice." "No," she said softer now. "You've had every choice. And you keep choosing to stay." He didn't answer. The truth coiled in his chest, heavy and unfamiliar. Something warmer than duty, deeper than guilt. He thought of the nights spent beside her in the archives, the way her hair caught the candlelight, the sound of her laughter when she finally deciphered a passage in Old Tum. He thought of the way she looked at him now, not with pity, not with scorn, but with something that frightened him more than hatred ever had. Hope. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windowpane. The fire dimmed further, leaving only the candles to guard the dark. Hermione's breathing steadied, her fingers still curled in his. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll be here." And he meant it, not because the oath demanded it, but because, for the first time in his life, he wanted to be. The summons arrived on a Tuesday, carried by an owl with silver-streaked feathers that dissolved into mist upon delivery. Hermione unfolded the parchment with steady hands, though her pulse betrayed her beneath the surface. The official seal of the Wisengamot pressed into the wax like a cold thumbprint. She read it once, then again, then set it down on the kitchen table as if it might burn. Draco stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a damp tea towel in hand. He'd been washing the few dishes they'd accumulated over the past week, small domestic rituals, neither of them acknowledged, but both clung to. "They're calling you to answer," he said, not a question. She nodded, gaze fixed on the hearth. "They say I've disrupted ancient wards, that the Malfoy oath is classified dark, magic, unregulated, volatile, and potentially enslaving." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. She'd already begun constructing her defense. Draco exhaled through his nose, a sound between amusement and bitterness. "Of course they do. The Ministry fears what it doesn't understand, and what it can't control." He stepped forward, picking up the letter. His fingers brushed the seal, and for a moment the ink shimmered, responding to his bloodline. "They'll dissect it," Hermione said quietly. "They'll dissect star us star. They already have." They dropped the parchment. "You think they haven't been watching? Every whispered conversation? Every shared book? Every time I stayed the night on your sofa, because the wards flared when I tried to apparate home?" His eyes flicked to hers. "They see betrayal in loyalty, suspicion in silence." She didn't answer. Outside, rain had begun to fall, slow and steady against the window pane, blurring the line between the garden and the sky. The cottage, hidden in the folds of the Scottish Highlands, felt suddenly fragile, like paper held too close to flame. 2 days later, they stood before the Wiesengemot in a repurposed chamber beneath the ministry, the air thick with the scent of old stone and ink. Rows of robed figures loomed above, their faces half-shadowed in the enchanted torchlight. At the center sat the head of magical law, Madame Thorne, a woman whose voice had once condemned Death Eaters and now sought to police redemption. "Hermione Jean Granger," she intoned, "you are charged with willful engagement in blood-based enchantments of unknown origin and prohibited lineage. You are further accused of harboring and enabling a known participant in such magic, Draco Lucius Malfoy, without due reporting. How do you answer?" Hermione lifted her chin. "I deny all charges of malice or concealment. The oath binding Mr. Malfoy to my family is not of my making, nor was it activated by my hand. It is a remnant of old magic, forgotten, not forbidden. I have sought only to understand it, not exploit it." A murmur rose among the benches. "And yet," interjected a voice from the left, "you have allowed him to reside with you. You have conducted research into ancestral curses, exchanged blood oaths as part of your investigations, and, according to verified reports, shared protective charms that bind your life forces in tandem. Is that not tampering?" Draco stepped forward before she could speak. "The magic chose Star Me Star, not her. The Malfoy oath was sealed centuries ago by my ancestor, Alaric Malfoy, who swore service to the Granger line after a betrayal that cost 3 lives. It lay dormant until my failure to atone reawakened it. I serve not because she commands, but because my blood demands it." "Convenient," someone scoffed. "It's not convenient," Hermione said, sharper now. "It's painful. It's star, real star. You want proof? Look at the scars on his arms, etched by the oath itself when he tried to leave. Look at the dreams we both have, of fire, of a locked door, of a woman in grey robes begging us to remember. This isn't dark magic. It's memory. It's history." Silence settled like dust. Madame Thorne studied her. "And what do you intend to do if we allow this bond to continue?" Hermione glanced at Draco. He didn't look at her, but his shoulder brushed hers. Brief, almost accidental. "We intend to finish what was begun centuries ago," she said. "Not to break the magic, but to honor it, and then perhaps to lay it to rest." The chamber held its breath, and somewhere beneath the stones, the old wards trembled, not in warning, but in recognition. The morning light slanted through the high windows of the Burrows' kitchen, dust motes swirling in golden beams like tiny drifting stars. Hermione sat at the worn wooden table, a stack of crumbling parchments before her, ink smudged on her fingertips. The air smelled of old paper, damp wool, and the faintest trace of cinnamon from the tea cooling beside her. A barn owl, not her own, tapped insistently at the window pane, one talon clutching a cream-colored envelope sealed with a familiar script. She blinked, startled. With a flick of her wand, the latch clicked open, and the bird fluttered in, dropping the letter onto her plate before swooping off without so much as a peep. Hermione stared at it, heart stuttering. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her mother's looping cursive, the way she always underlined the Y in Hermione. It had been months since she'd heard from them, not since she'd begun digging into the old Malfoy lineage, the ancestral magic buried beneath Black Lake Manor. She ran her thumb over the seal. "Mum and Dad," she whispered, half to herself, half to the quiet room. The last time they'd written, she'd told them she was traveling for work, research on forgotten magical laws. She hadn't mentioned Draco, hadn't mentioned the oath. How could she explain that the boy who'd called her a mudblood now knelt before her in ritual silence, every full moon, bound by blood magic, older than the ministry itself. She broke the seal carefully, as if the paper might crumble, like the spells she'd been studying. The letter unfolded with a soft sigh. Star, my dearest Hermione, star, star. We hope this finds you well and safe. It's been too long since your last letter, and your father worries. You know how he is. I started gardening again, just like when you were a girl. The roses are coming in late this year, but the lavender is thriving. I think of you when I prune it. You always loved the smell. Your father fixed the backstep and grumbles about the neighbor's cat, but otherwise all is quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. We miss you, darling. Come home soon, won't you? Even for a weekend. The guest room is made up, just in case. Star, star, love. Always. Mum Star. Beneath it a second note in her father's blocky print. Star Hermione, keep your head down, and your wand ready. We saw a man in a long coat near the surgery last week. Didn't say a word, just stood there, watching. Probably nothing, but you've always been one to take precautions. Stay sharp, and eat properly. Your mother says you've lost weight. Star Hermione's breath caught. She read the last line again. Star a man in a long coat. She first tightened around the parchment. That wasn't like her father. Not the kind of thing he'd mention unless he was truly uneasy. Draco had warned her. Whispered it in the darkened archives one night. Voice low. Old magic draws old eyes. They'll smell the oath on you like blood in water. She folded the letter slowly, pressing the creases flat. The warmth of her parents' words, the lavender, the guest room, now felt fragile like glass under pressure. Were they in danger? Because of her? Because of what she was uncovering? A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned, wand half drawn, only to see Draco standing in the doorway, pale and warning light. His silver blonde hair uncharacteristically tousled. He didn't enter, just watched her. You've heard from them, he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to speak. He exhaled long and slow. Then you know they're not safe. I don't even know what this is, she said, voice shaking. A letter, a warning. Coincidence. No such thing, he murmured, stepping forward at last. Not with magic like ours. Our magic? She asked. Sharp. He met her gaze. It's not just mine anymore. It's in your blood now. Every time I swear fealty. They can sense it, the ones who kept the old grudges alive. The ones who remember what the Malfoys did, and what the Grangers once refused to forgive. She stared at him, the letter trembling in her hand. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutter, and somewhere, far away, a rose bloomed in a suburban garden, its scent carried on a breeze that knew no mercy. The air in the Malfoy library turned to ice long before the first whisper slithered from the stone walls. Draco stood rigid, one hand still hovering over the open grimoire, its spine cracked with age, the ink inside written in blood and salt. The final line of the oath, star until the debt is lifted by grace, not by force, star, burned in his vision, mocking him. He had tried to break it, not with magic, not with blood, but with denial, and the house had felt it. A low groan echoed through the chamber, like stone grinding against stone. The candle flames flickered, then bent sideways, though no wind stirred. From the shadows behind the ancestral portraits, something began to stir, pale, semi-transparent figures, their faces sharp with disapproval, their robes impossibly preserved in centuries-old fashion. Silas Malfoy, the oath's architect, stepped forward first, his silver hair like frozen wire, his eyes two chips of obsidian. You defy the blood, he intoned, voice resonating through Draco's bones. You court shame with every breath spent in alliance to the mud. Do not, Draco cut in, voice low but steady. Finish that word in my presence. The ghost's lip curled. You forget your place, heir. The Granger girl is not kin. She is the instrument of our undoing. The wards know it. The land knows it. Draco closed the grimoire slowly, the sound loud in the stillness. The wards were built on lies, on blood magic that fed on cruelty. Maybe it's time they fell. A howl tore through the manor, not through the air, but through the very fabric of the house. The floor trembled. Cracks spider-webbed across the marble floor, pulsing with faint, sickly green light. The protective enchantments, woven over generations to shield the Malfoys from enemies, from truth, from consequence, were unraveling. Outside, the sky darkened unnaturally. The silver birches that lined the drive shivered, their leaves turning black at the edges. The wards had not only protected the manor, they had bound the land, the soil, the ancestral magic to the purity of blood and purpose, and now that purpose was questioned. Draco felt it in his teeth, a high-pitched hum like glass about to shatter. The ghosts multiplied, seething in the periphery, women in lace collars, men with cold eyes and sharper swords. They were not merely watching, they were resisting. "You would bring ruin upon us all," accused Lucretia Malfoy, her voice like dry parchment. "For what? Guilt? A witch's pity." Draco turned his back on them, walked to the tall window overlooking the dying garden. "For once," he said, "I'd like to choose what kind of man I am, not what the house demands." The response was immediate. The window exploded inward, not with force, but as if the glass had simply ceased to exist. A gale roared through the room, scattering pages, overturning tables. The ghosts wailed, a sound that was part fury, part sorrow, and then they were gone, vanished like breath on a mirror. But the damage remained. Draco stepped into the hallway, his boots crunching on shattered glass. The portraits along the east wing were blank now. Their subjects fled or silenced. The air tasted of iron and damp earth. The manor was dividing, half clinging to the old magic, half surrendering to something new, uncertain. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing the small folded letter. He had not yet sent. Hermione's handwriting curled across the front, careful, precise. "Star. For your eyes only star. Fesikos," he said. He hadn't answered her last question. Star. What if the oath isn't a punishment, but a chance? Star. Now, standing in the fractured silence of his ancestral home, Draco wondered if the house itself was afraid of that answer. The air in the Malfoy library thickened like cooling wax, heavy with the scent of old parchment, and something sharper, ozone maybe, with a metallic whisper of magic long dormant. Hermione's fingers still hovered over the page, the ink of the oath glowing faintly beneath her touch, when the first shiver ran through the floorboards. A low hum rose from the stone, vibrating up through their boots, and the candles flared blue. Draco stepped back instinctively, hand on his wand. "What in?" "It's reacting," Hermione whispered, not moving. "The blood magic. Our blood. It's triggering something." The book trembled. The words lifted off the page in ribbons of silver light, swirling like smoke, coiling around their wrists, their throats, their temples. Hermione gasped as cold seeped into her bones, not the chill of winter, but the deep, hollow freeze of time unraveling. Draco grabbed her arm, more from reflex than concern, but neither of them could pull away. Then the world dissolved. Not with a crash, not with a shout, but with a slow, sickening tilt, as if the floor had turned to liquid. The library melted into shadow, then reformed, older, darker, centuries younger. Stone walls, rough-hewn and unpolished, torches instead of candles, the scent of damp earth and burning tallow. They stood in a chamber they had never seen, yet somehow recognized the original Malfoy crypt, long before the manor was built. Figures stood in a circle, 7 of them robed in deep green and black, faces obscured by hoods. At the center, a woman, pale, fierce-eyed, her wrists bound with cord that bled faintly. A Granger, though the name hadn't yet taken root. Behind her, a man in simple wool, mouth open, in silent protest, held back by enchantment. And standing apart, cloaked in arrogance and fear, a man who bore Draco's sharp jaw, his cold gaze. Arcturus Malfoy, the first to swear. "By blood and bone," Arcturus intoned, voice echoing unnaturally, "I bind myself and mine to the Granger line, to serve until the debt is paid in full." Hermione's breath caught. This was it, the moment, the betrayal, the beginning. The woman in the center raised her head. "You call it service," she said, voice clear as a struck bell, "but it is penance. You stole the right of binding meant for your ancestors. Use our magic to save your dying line. This oath is not your honor, it is your shame." Arcturus did not flinch. "I accept it." "You will serve," she continued, "not as master, not as ally, but as shield. Your blood will protect ours. Your pride will kneel, and when the last debt is paid, the magic will release you." A hush fell. Then the ritual blade flashed. Arcturus cut his palm, burst it to the earth. The woman did the same. The magic surged, visible now. a spiral of gold and black that wound around them, searing the vow into the bones of the world. Draco staggered. That wasn't. Our family said we were repaying a debt of honor, that the Grangers owed us. They lied, Hermione said softly. They've lied for generations. The vision flickered. The figures began to fade, but the magic didn't release them. Instead, it pulled tighter, threading through their veins, humming with recognition. Hermione felt it, the echo of that ancient blood, her blood rising in answer. Draco's hand still gripped her arm, but now it trembled. "Do you feel that?" he asked, voice raw. "Yes," she whispered. "It knows us. It remembers." A gust of wind swept through the crypt, though there were no doors, no windows. The torches guttered. The oath, once dormant, now pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. And for the first time, they weren't reading history. They were part of it. Rain tapped a slow, steady rhythm against the leaded windows of the Malfoy library, each drop echoing like the ticking of a clock winding backward through time. The air smelled of old parchment and damp stone, thick with the weight of centuries. Hermione stood beside the ancient hearth, her fingers tracing the edge of a silver locket, cold, tarnished, pulsing faintly, as though it still remembered a heartbeat. Draco stood across from her, arms crossed, jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered toward the locket like a man drawn to flame. "It's not just an oath," Hermione whispered. "It's a memory, sealed in blood." Draco scoffed, but the sound lacked its usual bite. Every Malfoy artifact claims to hold some grand truth. Most are just excuses for arrogance. "This isn't arrogance," she said, lifting the locket. "It's a confession." She pressed her thumb to the clasp. The metal warmed instantly, then split open with a soft click. A wisp of silver smoke curled out, swirling into the air, like ink in water. Draco stepped back, but Hermione reached for his hand. Instinctive, unthinking, their fingers brushed, and a jolt passed between them, sharp and electric. Then the room dissolved. They stood in a different hall, warmer lit by torchlight, the stones carved with runes that pulsed gold. The younger Malfoy, tall, proud, but not cruel, knelt before a woman with dark curls and kind eyes. She wore the crest of a family long forgotten, a stag entwined with a serpent. "By my blood and yours," the Malfoy said, voice thick with emotion. "I bind myself not as master, but as guardian. As long as your line endures, mine shall stand beside it. Not above, not beneath, but bound in kinship." Hermione's breath caught. He was in love with her. Draco said nothing. His face had gone pale. The vision shifted. The same Malfoy stood before a council of robed figures, his expression strained. "The oath was meant to protect," he argued. "Not to be hoarded, not to be used as leverage." One of the elders stepped forward, his voice cold. "Love is weakness, blood is power. We shall twist the vow, reforge it as duty, not devotion. Let their descendants serve us in silence." "No," the young Malfoy whispered. But the elders began the incantation. The runes on the walls flared crimson. The original vow writhed like a living thing, its meaning unraveling, stitching itself into something darker. The promise of kinship became servitude. Protection became penance, and the locket, the sacred token of love, was buried, forgotten. The vision faded. They were back in the library, gasping as if pulled from deep water. Hermione clutched the locket to her chest, her pulse loud in her ears. Draco stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists. "All these years," he said, voice low, "we told ourselves we were cursed by circumstance, by pride, but we made star the curse." Hermione looked at him. "It wasn't your fault." "No," he said bitterly. "But it was my family's, and I've spent my life wearing the mask they carved, not even knowing it was never meant to fit." Silence stretched between them, fragile as spider silk. Outside, the rain slowed. A single beam of moonlight broke through the clouds, falling across the locket in her palm. It shimmered, once, twice, then fell still. She reached out again, slower this time. When her fingers touched his wrist, he didn't pull away. "We can break it," she said. "Not just the oath. The cycle." Draco looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no mask at all. Only the raw, uncertain man beneath. "And if we do," he asked, "what happens to us?" She didn't answer, not with words. but her thumb brushed the pulse point on his wrist, and in that small gesture, something unspoken took root, tender, dangerous, and irrevocable. Rain tapped a slow, uneven rhythm against the leaded windows of the study, each drop sounding like a pinprick in the silence between them. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the ancient books stacked like sentinels on every surface. Hermione sat cross-legged on the rug, her back against the sofa, a scroll half unfurled in her lap. She didn't look up when Draco finally spoke, but her fingers stilled on the brittle parchment. "I used to think," he began, voice low, roughened by disuse, "that if I ever lived past the war, it would be because I'd earned it." She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch his profile in the dim light. He stood by the hearth, one hand braced against the mantel, staring into the dying flames as if they might answer him. "I didn't believe in redemption back then, not for people like me, but I believed in survival, in silence, in keeping my head down and my mouth shut, and letting the world forget I existed." He paused, swallowed, and then this oath found me. His fingers curled tighter around the stone edge. "It's like the past won't let go. Not just the things I did, but the things my family did, long before I was born. The magic remembers. Its star knows. And now I'm bound to star you, star, of all people, to atone for sins I didn't commit, but still." He broke off, breathing out sharply. "Still feel in my bones." Hermione set the scroll aside and rose, padding barefoot across the rug until she stood a few feet behind him. She didn't touch him. She knew better. "You're not being punished for things you didn't do, Draco," she said softly. "The oath isn't about blame. It's about balance, about healing." He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Healing. You say that like it's a gentle thing. Like it doesn't carve you open first." "It does," she admitted. "But that doesn't mean it's not necessary." He turned to face her then, his eyes silver in the half-light haunted. "What if I don't want Star to be healed? What if I don't want to remember every time I bowed, every time I sneered, every time I stood by and did nothing? What if I'd rather just be left alone in my guilt? At least then I know who I am." "And who is that?" she asked, voice steady. "A coward, a survivor, a Malfoy." He exhaled, tilting his head back as if the ceiling might offer escape. "But this path we're walking, it's not forgiveness. It feels like exposure. Like every step forward pulls another layer off, and I keep waiting to find nothing left underneath. Just hollow." Hermione stepped closer, close enough that he could see the warmth in her eyes, the quiet certainty that unsettled him more than any accusation ever had. "Maybe that's the point," she said. "Maybe redemption isn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it's about facing what's already there, ugly and fractured, and choosing to carry it differently, not to erase the past, but to stop letting it chain you." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he didn't see judgment. He saw understanding, not absolution, not pity, but the kind of clear-eyed compassion that terrified him, because it offered no easy answers, only truth. "And if I'm not strong enough?" he whispered. "You already are," she said. "You're still here, you're still trying. That's not punishment, Draco. That's courage." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the rain softened to a hush. He closed his eyes, and for a breath, just one, he let himself believe her. Rain tapped steadily against the leaded windows of the manor's east wing, where the shelves bowed under the weight of ancient tomes bound in cracked leather and charred parchment. The air smelled of dust and damp wool, and the candlelight flickered like a hesitant breath. Hermione stood with her back to the door, one hand braced against a shelf, the other clutching a brittle folio inscribed with Malfoy sigils that pulsed faintly in the dark. Her knuckles were white. Draco stood near the hearth, arms crossed, his face half-shadowed. He'd been silent for nearly an hour, watching her move from shelf to shelf, muttering incantations under her breath, tracing symbols with her fingertips, as though trying to coax secrets from stone. He didn't understand why she kept doing this, why she still looked at him with that stubborn fire in her eyes, as if he were worth saving. "It's not just about blood," she said finally, voice low but steady. "It never was." He didn't answer. The weight of the oath pressed against his chest like a lodestone, a constant thrum beneath his ribs. Every time he tried to leave the manor grounds, the magic pulled him back, gentle at first, then insistent, until it felt like iron bands around his lungs. The Granger bloodline had no idea it held the reins, no idea they'd been bound to this for over 3 centuries. But Hermione knew now. She turned to face him, her eyes dark with something he couldn't name. The curse feeds on guilt, Draco. It thrives on the idea that you're doomed, punished for sins you didn't even commit. But that's not how magic like this works. Not really. He scoffed, though there was no real venom in it. You think I don't know what I've done? You think I've forgotten who I was? No, she said, stepping closer. I think you remember too well, and that's exactly what it wants. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. The candle on the desk guttered, then flared back to life. Outside, the sky was bruised with storm clouds, and the trees bent like supplicants in the wind. The oath was forged in betrayal, she continued. One Malfoy betrayed a Granger ancestor during the witch trials, turned her over to the ministry for a pardon. She died screaming. The curse wasn't cast out of vengeance. It was born of sorrow, and it bound your family not to punish, but to protect, to atone. Draco looked away, and yet here I am, trapped. Because you believe you deserve to be. He snapped his gaze back to her. Don't presume to know what I deserve, Granger. I don't, she said softly. But I know what I choose. He stilled. She took another step. Redemption isn't something that's given or forced. It's chosen. Every day, every breath. The moment you decide to do better, that's when the old magic starts to crack. Her words hung in the air like smoke. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was naive, that blood debts didn't just dissolve because someone's star chose star differently. But then he looked at her, really looked, and saw the faint tremor in her hands, the shadows under her eyes, from nights spent poring over spells, from days spent defending him to the ministry, to her friends, to herself. She was choosing him, not because she had to, because she wanted to. And that, more than any incantation, more than any ancient ritual, was what the curse could not withstand. The folio in her hand shimmered. The sigils on its cover dimmed, then faded. A low hum filled the room like a lullaby half-remembered. And then silence. Draco felt it first, a loosening in his chest, as if a chain had snapped. He inhaled deeply, and for the first time in months, the air didn't burn. And Samayan, small but sure. You're not bound by the past, she whispered. You're free to choose your future. He didn't speak, but he didn't walk away either. And that, perhaps, was the first real choice he'd ever made. The air in the Malfoy library was thick with dust and silence, undisturbed for decades, save for the soft rasp of turning pages. Moonlight bled through the tall, arched windows, casting silver bars across the ancient tomes that lined the walls like sentinels of forgotten knowledge. Hermione stood with her back to the room, fingers tracing the ornate frame of a mirror, concealed behind a moth-eaten tapestry. It had taken 3 days of searching, and a forgotten charm from the Black family grimoire, to reveal it. This feels wrong, Draco murmured from the doorway, his voice low, almost reverent. That mirror hasn't been touched since my great-grandmother vanished in front of it. Hermione didn't turn. She didn't vanish, she stepped through. The oath mentions a threshold. Blood, us witness blood. I think this is it. He stepped forward, boots muffled on the threadbare rug. The mirror was tall, its frame carved from blackened oak, entwined with serpents whose eyes were chips of crimson stone. At its center, the glass was not reflective, but dark, like a pool of still ink. You're certain this won't trap you? He asked closer now. I'm certain I have to try. She met his gaze, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but the quiet acknowledgement of shared risk. She placed her palm flat against the surface. The glass rippled. A breath, cold and ancient, rushed from the mirror, carrying the scent of damp earth and burning herbs. Hermione gasped as the darkness within began to shift, swirling like smoke caught in a storm. Images formed, a woman in a long gray dress, standing in a forest, a dagger in her hand, a man with Malfoy silver eyes falling to his knees, a child with wild curls hidden beneath a cloak. Merlin. Draco whispered. The scenes flickered faster. Wars, oaths carved into stone, hands clasped over blood-soaked soil. Then a name etched in the air like fire. Star Elara Grimald Star. Hermione's breath caught. That name, she'd seen it in the family tree Sirius had once shown her. A distant ancestor erased from most records. The mirror showed her again, standing before a council of robed figures, her voice echoing though no sound came. Then Draco's ancestor, Lucian Malfoy, stepping forward, swearing fealty under moonlight, his hand bound to hers with a silver cord that pulsed like a vein. The oath wasn't punishment, Hermione said, dazed. It was a plea. She saved his life. He swore to protect her line, but when the Ministry began hunting mixed-blood families, the Malfoys, they broke it. Draco flinched. We hid. We survived. That's what we do. And now the magic remembers, she said softly. It's not just about debt. It's about balance. The oath bound your blood to mine, not as master and servant, but as shield and flame. The mirror darkened again, then cleared. This time it showed Star, Hermione, in a long emerald robe, standing beside Draco in robes of charcoal and silver, their hands resting on a stone altar. Behind them a tree with silver leaves grew from cracked earth. Children's laughter echoed, faint, distant, and the image shifted to a garden where an old woman with warm eyes and a man with sharp features sat beneath that same tree, hands entwined. Hermione stepped back, heart pounding. That can't be real. Draco didn't move. His reflection had not appeared in the glass. Only hers, only their future. It's not prophecy, he said quietly. It's possibility. The magic shows what could be, if we don't run from it. She turned to him, eyes glistening. You'd really stand beside me? After everything? He looked at the mirror, then at her, truly looked. And for the first time, there was no mask, no sneer, no inherited disdain, only the weight of what they'd lost, and what they might still become. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm tired of being afraid of my own name. The mirror dimmed, its surface once more a void, but the air between them had changed, warmer, charged, as if the past had exhaled, and the future had taken its first breath. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the high-arched windows of the Malfoy library, a soft percussion beneath the silence between them. Hermione stood with her back to the ancient hearth, her fingers tracing the edge of a brittle vellum scroll spread across the oak table. The ink shimmered faintly, as if breathing, reacting to the presence of both their blood. Draco watched her from across the room, arms folded, his pale hair catching the dim glow of the candlelight. It should work, she said, voice low, but steady. The incantation is sound. The runes are aligned. We followed every condition. Draco stepped forward, boots silent on the Persian rug. And yet, when we tried it last night, the parchment burned. Not metaphorically, literally, as if the magic rejected the rewrite. Hermione exhaled sharply, brushing a loose curl from her face, because it sensed hesitation, or dishonesty. The oath isn't just binding, it's perceptive. It reads intent. He let out a humorless laugh. Intent? You mean it knows I don't want this? Not truly. She turned to him then, eyes dark with something he couldn't name. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. It doesn't matter what you want, Draco. It matters which star means star. In magic doesn't care about pride, only truth. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, and the candles flickered. Shadows danced across the spines of forgotten tomes, books written in blood, spells sealed with vows. The air smelled of dust and old parchment, but beneath it, something sharper. The metallic tang of enchantment, alive and waiting. They had spent weeks unraveling the oath's origins, tracing it back to the 14th century, to a Malfoy ancestor who had betrayed a Granger forebear during the witch purges. The debt was not of gold, but of honor. The penalty, service, not just of body, but of will. And now, centuries later, the magic had reawakened, binding Draco to protect, obey, and serve, until the debt was paid in full. But Hermione believed there was another way, not to break the oath, but to reshape it, to transform compulsion into choice. They had rewritten the incantation together, not as master and servant, but as equals. The words were simple: star, by will, and witness, we accept this bond, not by blood debt, but by mutual accord. But when they'd spoken it together the night before, the parchment had blackened at the edges, curling like a dying leaf, and the runes had bled ink. "I don't trust it," Draco said now, voice rough. "I don't trust any star of this, my family's name, this house, the magic in my veins. It's all built on lies. How do I speak truth with a tongue like mine?" Hermione moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the faint smudge beneath them from sleepless nights. "You speak it by trying," she said softly, "by standing here, even when every instinct tells you to walk away. That's truth enough to start with." He looked away. "You make it sound noble. It's not. I'm here because I have to be. Are you?" She didn't challenge, only asked. "The oath compels your presence, yes, but it doesn't force you to listen, to help, to care." He clenched his jaw. The firelight caught the sharp angle of his cheekbone. "Don't do that. Don't pretend I'm becoming something I'm not." "I'm not pretending," she said. "I'm seeing what's there." Silence fell again, heavier this time. The rain slowed to a hush. Somewhere deep in the manor, a clock chimed the hour, 12 soft tones that seemed to vibrate in the bones of the house. Hermione reached for the vellum. "Let's try again, but this time, no recitation. Just say it. In your own words. What do you accept?" Draco stared at her. "That's not how magic works." "Maybe not," she said, "but oaths are made of words, and words are made of meaning. Say what you mean, even if it's ugly, even if it's small." He hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped to the table, placed his hand beside hers, not touching, but close. "I accept," he began, voice low, halting, "that I owe you. Not because of some cursed bloodline, but because I stood silent when I should have spoken. Because I believed the lies about you, about blood, about worth." He swallowed. "I don't know how to make that right, but I'm here. Not because I have to be, because I choose to be." The parchment trembled. The ink glowed. Silver now, not red. And for the first time the runes held. The air tasted of burnt parchment and wet stone, thick with the residue of magic gone wrong. Draco staggered back, his shoulders slamming against the cold wall of the chamber as the last echoes of the ritual imploded inward. The runes carved into the floor, centuries old, painstakingly deciphered, cracked like frozen glass, their glow snuffing out one by one. His breath came in ragged bursts, lungs aching as if he'd surfaced from drowning. Hermione lay sprawled on the flagstones, one arm flung out toward the shattered obsidian pedestal, where the blood-bound sigil had pulsed only seconds before. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, her fingers twitching. Draco pushed off the wall, boots crunching over splintered rock, and dropped to his knees beside her. "Granger," he said, voice rough. "Hermione." Her eyelids fluttered. A thin line of blood traced from her temple down the curve of her jaw, stark against skin gone pale as chalk. He reached out, then hesitated, some instinct holding him back, the old wariness warring with something sharper, closer to fear. She gasped, her body arching slightly before collapsing back. It fought back," she whispered. "The magic, it didn't want to be broken." "It's done," Draco said, more to convince himself than her. "The pedestal's in ruins, the sigil's gone." She turned her head toward him, eyes glassy but searching. "Are you sure?" He looked at the wreckage, ash swirling in the dim light like dying embers, the carved names of their ancestors now fractured beyond recognition. The oath had been sealed in blood, in silence, in secrets buried beneath generations of pride and lies, and now it was dust. "Unsure," he said. A slow breath escaped her, almost like relief, but then her fingers curled, grasping at his sleeve. "The cost. We paid it," he said, pulling her up gently. "You don't get to carry this alone." She leaned into him, trembling, her weight slight but real. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his ribs. The chamber was silent now. No hum of ancient enchantments, no whisper of oath-bound magic in the walls. Just the drip of water from the ceiling, the creak of settling stone. For the first time in months, perhaps years, there was nothing pulling at his veins, no invisible chain tugging him toward duty he never asked for. He was free. And yet, he looked down at her face, smudged with soot and blood, her hair wild from the storm of unraveling spells. Her breath warmed his collarbone. He felt unmoored. "We should go," she murmured, "before the wards collapse entirely." He nodded, helping her to her feet. She winced, favoring her left leg. He didn't ask, just slid his arm around her waist, steadying her, as they moved toward the narrow archway leading out. The tunnels were darker now, the torches sputtering. The castle above, once a Malfoy stronghold, now little more than a ruin reclaimed by ivy and silence, would not hold much longer. The breaking of the oath had destabilized the magic that had kept it standing for centuries. They climbed the crumbling stairs in slow silence, each step heavier than the last. At the surface the sky was breaking into dawn, pale gold bleeding through the mist. The air smelled of damp earth and distant rain. Hermione stopped at the edge of the garden, where a single rosebush, white, thorned, impossibly blooming, still stood amid the wreckage. "It survived," she said. Draco looked at it, then at her. Some things do. She turned to him then, really looked at him, and for a moment he saw it. The weight of all they'd carried, all they'd lost, all they'd done to survive. And beneath it, something else. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of understanding. He didn't let go of her hand, and she didn't pull away. The ward was quiet, save for the soft hiss of the enchanted lanterns that hovered near the ceiling, casting a pale gold light over the white linen and polished stone. Draco lay with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, his left arm bound in a sling of silver-threaded bandages that shimmered faintly when he moved. Pain still threaded through his ribs with every breath, but it was a dull ache now, not the fire that had seared through him when the curse broke, or tried to. Across the room, in the other bed, Hermione stirred. She didn't wake often. The healers said she'd been closer to the epicenter of the unraveling magic, that the ancient spell had recognized her bloodline as the anchor. Her fingers twitched against the blanket, and then she exhaled, slow and unsteady. Draco turned his head. Granger. No answer. He tried again. Hermione. Her eyelids fluttered. She blinked once, then twice, and finally focused on him. "Malfoy." Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw by days of silence or screaming. He wasn't sure which. "You're awake." "So are you," she murmured, shifting carefully. "How long?" 3 days, maybe 4. Time blurs when you're unconscious and half dead. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, charming as ever. He didn't return the smile. "Do you remember?" She closed her eyes. "The altar. The runes. Your blood on my hands." Her breath caught. "I thought you were dying. I thought you were the one the magic wanted." They fell silent. The truth hung between them, heavier than the enchanted air. The oath, the blood debt. The curse that had bound his ancestors to serve hers, twisted over centuries into something vengeful, something hungry. They had broken it, or so they hoped. But magic like that didn't vanish clean. It bled. He remembered the moment the final incantation collapsed. A sound like shattering glass, the ground splitting beneath their feet, Hermione reaching for him as the light swallowed them both. He remembered the voice, not one voice, but many, whispering in a language older than Latin, older than the stones of Hogwarts. Star debt unpaid, blood ungiven, service denied. Star. And then nothing. Now, they were here. Alive, breathing. But neither of them knew if it was over. A healer's assistant passed by the open door, pausing when she saw Hermione awake. "I'll fetch Healer Varn," she said, hurrying off. Draco watched Hermione struggle to sit up. He didn't offer help. She wouldn't take it. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. He knew what she meant. The absence. The silence where the oath had once hummed beneath his skin, a constant pressure, a whisper in his blood. For years it had been there, a weight he'd learned to carry. Now nothing, but was it gone, or just dormant? "No," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean it's broken." She nodded, her fingers brushing the inside of her wrist where the family mark, a faint, branching sigil, passed through Granger women and flared red during the ritual. It was pale now, almost invisible. "My grandmother used to say, the old magic doesn't die, it waits." "Poetic," Draco said, though there was no bite in it. A draft curled through the room, carrying the scent of dried herbs and spelled ink. Outside, London drizzled under a leaden sky, rain tapping the enchanted windows like fingers testing a lock. "I keep dreaming," Hermione said suddenly, "of a woman in white, standing at the edge of a forest. She's calling my name, but it's not my name. It's hers. Star. Ilara." "Star." Draco stiffened. "Ilara Malfoy, my great-great-aunt. Died in 1892, supposedly drowned." "She didn't drown," Hermione whispered. "She stepped into the veil, to seal the curse, to protect your family from ours." He looked at her, really looked. Her face was pale, her hair a wild halo around her shoulders, but her eyes were alive with understanding. "You think she sacrificed herself, to balance the debt?" "I think the oath was never meant to enslave," Hermione said. "It was a plea, a binding meant to force reconciliation, but over time it corrupted. The magic twisted what it was meant to heal." Draco closed his eyes. And now the silence answered. The ward, the city, the world, all holding its breath. "I don't know," she said, "but I don't feel cursed. I feel free." He opened his eyes, looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in his life, Draco Malfoy believed in grace. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the leaded glass of the Malfoy study, a soft percussion beneath the silence that had settled between them. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the ancient grimoire, lying open on the table. Hermione's fingers hovered above the page, tracing the delicate script of a forgotten incantation, her breath catching as the ink shimmered faintly under her touch. Across from her, Draco stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the stormlit sky, arms crossed as if holding himself together. It had been 3 weeks since the oath had reawakened, since the ancestral wards of Malfoy Manor had flared to life with a pulse of silver light, binding him not to servitude in chains, but to a duty older than hatred. He was no longer compelled by force, but by something quieter, deeper, a resonance in his bones that answered whenever Hermione spoke his name. Not a command, not a curse, a connection. "It's fading," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "The binding script, look, the edges are blurring." Draco turned, his pale eyes narrowing. "That's impossible. The oath is eternal. My ancestors swore it under moonblood and bone oath. It doesn't just dissolve. It's changing," she corrected, tilting the book toward the light. "The magic recognizes intent. Our intent. When you chose to stay, when you helped me translate the wards without being forced, it shifted. The magic felt it." He exhaled sharply through his nose, stepping closer. "And what does that mean, Granger? That I've earned my freedom, or that it's found a new way to trap me?" She looked up then, her brown eyes steady. "It means you're no longer bound by debt. You're bound by choice." The words hum in the air, fragile as spider silk. Draco's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Rain streaked the glass behind him like tears down stone. They had spent nights like this, shoulder to shoulder, poring over crumbling scrolls, arguing over syntax, correcting each other's pronunciation of archaic charms. At first, it had been necessity, then habit, now something else. A rhythm had formed between them, a quiet understanding that needed no words. He handed her tea without asking. She saved him the last scone from the tray. They flinched in unison when the old house creaked, as if the walls themselves remembered war. And there were moments, small, treacherous things, that made his chest ache. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. How she hummed under her breath when she read. A soft, tuneless song from childhood. Once he had caught her barefoot on the library rug, socks discarded, toes curling into the weave. He had looked away quickly, heat rising in his neck. Now as she reached for the quill to copy the shifting runes, her hand brushed his. A spark, faint, golden, leapt between them, not pain. Not magic forced, but warmth. They both froze. "That wasn't part of the oath," he said, voice low. "No," she whispered. "That was something else." The air between them thickened, charged not with obligation, but with possibility. The grimoire's pages fluttered as if stirred by an unseen breath. The silver script continued to fade, replaced by new markings. symbols neither of them recognized, delicate as vines curling around a trellis. Hermione turned her palm up as if offering proof. A faint glow pulsed beneath her skin, just above her wrist. A mark not of ownership, but of alignment. "It's not breaking," she said, "it's transforming." Draco stared at her hand, then slowly, carefully, turned his own over. A matching light flickered along his pulse point. He didn't pull away. Outside, the storm softened. The house settled, and for the first time in centuries, the magic of the Malfoys did not whisper of duty or debt, but of balance, of healing, of a bond not inherited but built, one choice, one breath, one shared silence at a time. Rain tapped steadily against the high-arched windows of the Ministry's Wizengamot chamber, a soft, persistent rhythm that matched the low hum of whispered debate. Hermione Granger stood at the speaker's podium, her fingers curled around the edges of a parchment she had rewritten 3 times. The ink was still faintly damp. Across the room, the assembly of witches and wizards shifted in their seats, some leaning forward with interest, others with arms crossed, expressions guarded. She took a breath and began. "For centuries," she said, voice clear, despite the tension in her chest, "our laws have treated magical inheritance as an immutable right, passed down by blood, untouched by consequence. But what happens," she paused, glancing briefly toward the back of the chamber, "when that inheritance carries with it not just power, but debt, not just privilege, but obligation?" A few brows furrowed. Someone scoffed. "Magic is not a ledger," called a voice from the middle rows. Gawain Robards, former Auror, now head of magical law enforcement. "We don't balance ancestral sins with modern servitude." "No," Hermione agreed, "we don't. But neither should we ignore the weight of what we inherit. Not just wealth, not just titles, but oaths, curses, binding magics older than the Ministry itself." A ripple passed through the room. "Last month," she continued, "a dormant Malfoy family oath resurfaced, one that tied Draco Malfoy to my family through a debt incurred during the First Wizarding War. A debt neither of us knew existed. The magic was real, the consequences immediate, and yet there was no legal framework to address it. No oversight, no protection. Murmurs now, louder. A few heads turned toward the back, where Draco stood just inside the doorway, pale and still in tailored charcoal robes. He hadn't been invited. He had come anyway. "I am not here to accuse," Hermione said, though her eyes met his for a fleeting second. "I'm here to amend. I propose the Inheritance Accountability Act, a revision of magical lineage laws to require disclosure of binding ancestral obligations upon inheritance of estate or title. Any witch or wizard assuming a family name or fortune would be obligated to undergo a magical audit, a tracing of ancestral oaths, curses, or compulsions that may affect autonomy." "Silence. That sounds like a violation of private lineage," said Augusta Longbottom, her voice sharp as flint. "Are we to subject every heir to magical excavation? What of privacy, of dignity? Of dignity?" Hermione's voice softened, but did not waver. "Draco Malfoy spent weeks under a compulsion that forced him to serve my family, not out of malice, but because an ancestor swore an oath to atone for betrayal. He had no choice. I had no warning. Is it more dignified to pretend such things don't exist? Or to finally acknowledge them, and build safeguards?" She stepped down from the podium, pacing slowly between the rows. "This isn't about punishment. It's about transparency, about preventing harm. How many other families carry silent debts? How many heirs will wake one morning to find their magic bound by something they never agreed to?" No one answered. Draco exhaled, barely audible. He had read the proposal the night before, in the hushed quiet of her study, a cup of tea cooling between his hands. She had offered him a quill, asked for his input. He had written 2 sentences. One word had been caution, the other, consent. Now, standing there, he felt the weight of centuries, not just in his blood, but in the silence of the room. Finally, Padma Patil, newly elected representative of the Charms Guild, raised her hand. "I move we form a committee to review the proposal, with input from both ancient lineage experts and magical ethics scholars." A few nods. Then another hand. Then another. Hermione closed her eyes for the briefest moment. Outside, the rain softened. A single shaft of late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, cutting across the chamber floor like a promise, or perhaps an omen. Dust motes swirled in the slanted afternoon light, catching like flecks of gold in the air as Draco Malfoy ran his fingers along the edge of a shattered window frame in the east wing. The glass had never been replaced, shattered during the final battle, when curses had torn through the estate like storm winds. He hadn't come back for years, not truly. A few hurried visits, wards to maintain, nothing more. But now, with the weight of the oath pressing against his ribs like a second heartbeat, he had returned to rebuild. Not to erase, but to remember. The wand in his pocket remained untouched. He worked with his hands instead, sweeping debris, stacking broken stone, sealing cracks with mortar mixed by hand. Magic could restore the manor in hours, make it pristine, flawless, untouched by war, but that wasn't what he wanted. The scars were part of the house now, part of him. The blackened beam above the grand staircase, the gouge in the marble floor where a killing curse had missed its mark, the ghostly handprint smeared in soot on the library door. These were not blemishes, they were proof. He paused in the drawing room, where the ceiling had partially collapsed. Moonlight used to stream through the crystal chandelier that once hung there. Now ivy crept in through the open sky, tendrils curling around iron fixtures like something claiming what was always meant to be shared. He knelt, brushing fingers over a cracked tile in the hearth. Beneath it, hidden for decades, was a small silver locket, engraved with the Malfoy crest, but snapped open, empty. He didn't open it. He already knew what wasn't inside. A week ago, he'd stood in the ministry archives, parchment in hand, reading the archaic script of the blood oath of 1382. A vow forged in secrecy, sealed with blood, binding the first Malfoy to serve the Granger line whenever their magic stirred the old wards. No one had known the Grangers were magical then. No one had known they were even related. Distantly, through a witch burned in Essex, whose daughter fled north, changed her name, and buried her magic deep. The oath had slept for centuries, until now. And now, Hermione Granger held the key, though she didn't know it yet. Draco stood, dusting soot from his palms. Outside, the gardens were overgrown, roses strangling the hedges, but he left them, let them grow wild, let the past breathe. He walked through the hall where his father had once held court, where Death Eaters had gathered in shadowed silence. The tapestries still hung, faded, moth-eaten, the silver thread tarnished with age. One depicted a Malfoy ancestor kneeling before a figure cloaked in green, hand over heart. The inscription beneath was in Old French, Star pour la dette qui ne peut être payée d'or. For the debt that cannot be paid by gold. He exhaled, long and slow. A soft knock echoed from the front gate. 3 precise raps. He knew that rhythm. He didn't need to see her to know she stood there, impatient, wrapped in that worn brown coat, air escaping its bun in wild spirals. Hermione Granger, war hero, brilliant witch, and, according to ancient magic, his liege. He didn't go to her, not yet. Instead he lit a single candle in the entryway, placing it on the sill. A signal. I'm here. The house remembers. So do I. When he finally stepped onto the path, leaves crunching beneath his boots, she was waiting, arms crossed, eyes sharp with suspicion, and something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or concern. You left the gate broken, she said. I did, he replied. But I didn't fix it. She looked past him, into the dim hall, the flicker of the candle dancing across the walls. And you're not going to, are you? No, he said quietly. Some things should stay open. The air in the library grew still, so abruptly that the crackle of the fire seemed to hush of its own accord. Hermione looked up from the open grimoire, her fingers pausing over a passage written in blood ink that had only just revealed itself beneath a charm Draco had broken with a whispered phrase in Parseltongue. He stood beside her, sleeves rolled to the elbows, face shadowed with exhaustion, and something quieter, something closer to hope. Then the candles flickered, not with wind, but with purpose. One by one, their flames turned silver, casting long, wavering reflections across the stone floor, like rippling water under moonlight. A chill passed through the room, not of cold, but of presence, ancient, watchful, and unnervingly kind. Draco stepped forward, instinctively placing himself between Hermione and the center of the room, where the air had begun to shimmer. Don't, she whispered, touching his arm. She's not a threat. And then she was there, not fully, not corporeally, but as a woman woven from mist and memory, her robes the deep green of yew leaves, her hair braided with silver thread and bone charms, her eyes, large and dark, held centuries in their depth. A witch of the old blood, the first matron of the Malfoy line, though she had not yet taken that name. She looked at Draco first, her expression unreadable, then at Hermione, and when she smiled, it was like dawn breaking over frozen ground. "You've done what no other could," she said, her voice layered, as if many women spoke at once. "You have not broken the oath, nor denied its weight. You have honored it, together." Draco swallowed. "I never asked for this burden." "No," the witch agreed, "but you did not cast it aside either. That is the difference between a boy raised in pride and a man choosing humility." Hermione rose slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. "The curse, it wasn't meant to enslave, was it?" "It was meant to teach." The apparition inclined her head. "Our families were once allies, bound not by power, but by promise. When the Malfoys turned from that path, when they hoarded magic and betrayed their oaths, the magic itself demanded balance, not vengeance. Balance." Draco looked down at his hands that had once trembled under the dark mark, hands that had healed a basilisk's wound with Hermione's potion on his skin. "I swore I'd never serve anyone like that again. And yet," the spirit murmured, "you served not out of fear, but choice. You stayed, even when she offered you freedom, even when the magic would have released you." Silence settled, thick with understanding. "I didn't want to leave," Draco admitted, so quietly it barely stirred the air. He didn't look at Hermione, but she felt the words like a touch. "Not then, not now." The witch exhaled, a sound like wind through ancient trees. "Then the cycle ends here. The debt is paid. The magic returns to sleep." She raised a translucent hand, and between her fingers a thread of light spun into being, gold and silver twined, frayed in places, but unbroken. It hovered above their heads, pulsing gently, before dissolving into the rafters like starlight. "You have remade what was lost," she said, "not through blood spilled, but through trust given." Hermione stepped forward. Can we ask your name?" The figure smiled again, softer this time. "Names are power, and I have given enough. But know this, my blood runs in both of you, though you may not see it. The old magic does not forget its children." And with that, the silver flames dimmed. The mist thinned. The warmth of the fire returned, and the grimoire on the table snapped shut with a soft thud. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Draco turned to Hermione, his gray eyes searching hers. "Do you believe her?" "I do," Hermione said. "And I think she was proud of you." He looked away, but not before she saw the glint of something unshed in his eyes. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the towers of the manor, gilding the ivy on the walls. The past had spoken, and for the first time it had blessed them. Rain tapped a slow rhythm against the leaded windows of the old Malfoy study, a steady hush that filled the silence between them. The fire had burned low, embers glowing like dying stars in the hearth, casting long shadows across the worn spines of ancient tomes. Hermione stood near the desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a brittle parchment, her breath shallow, as if afraid to disturb the weight of what they'd uncovered. Draco stood by the window, his reflection, a ghost in the darkened glass. The storm outside mirrored the one that had finally settled within him. It had taken months of dusty archives, whispered incantations in forgotten tomes, nights spent side by side in the hushed corners of Hogwarts' restricted stacks, and the dimly lit corners of the Ministry's hidden vaults. They had followed the trail of blood and betrayal, unraveling the curse that bound their families, a curse born of pride, broken vows, and a Malfoy ancestor who had betrayed a Granger witch during the Inquisition. The magic had demanded reparation, and now, centuries later, it had fallen to him. But the magic was spent, the curse broken, and still he remained. Hermione turned to him, her voice soft, edged with something unspoken. "It's over, Draco. You're free." He didn't move. "Am I?" She frowned. "The enchantment is gone. The oath can't compel you anymore. You don't have to stay." "No," he said, turning from the window at last. "I don't." The room seemed to hold its breath. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, as if crossing a threshold he could never return from. His hands were empty, his wand tucked away. He wore no ring of office, no heirloom of power, just a man standing before another, stripped of titles and spells. "I stood in this house my whole life," he said, "and believed that blood defined us, that names carried destiny. I thought service was weakness, that mercy was a flaw." He paused, his gray eyes holding hers. "But you taught me otherwise. Not with spells, not with books, with how you looked at me, even when I deserved your hatred, even when I didn't deserve your kindness." She didn't speak. Her fingers curled slightly against the parchment. "I was bound by magic once," he said. "Now I choose, not because I must, not because an old curse demands it, but because I want to." He knelt, not in submission, not in ritual, but in sincerity. "I swear," he said, voice low, but clear, "that I will stand with you, not as your servant, not as your enemy, but as your equal, as your ally, if you'll have me." Hermione's breath caught. "Draco, I swear I will speak truth, even when it wounds. I will protect you, not because your name is tied to mine by ancient magic, but because I care for you, deeply, more than I ever thought I could." He swallowed. "And if you walk away tomorrow, I will not follow. But if you let me walk beside you, then I will, for as long as you allow it." Tears glistened at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant roll of thunder. Then she stepped forward. She didn't offer her hand. She didn't pull him up. Instead, she knelt too, until they were level, until the space between them was measured not in blood or history, but in breath and choice. "I don't want a vow born of guilt," she said quietly. "I want honesty. I want time. I want us, however that looks." He nodded, a single solemn dip of his chin. "Then that's what I give you, not an oath of duty, but a promise of possibility." Outside, the rain slowed. A sliver of moon broke through the clouds, spilling silver across the floor between them. And for the first time in centuries, a Malfoy entered into a vow, not because the blood demanded it, but because the heart willed it. Rain tapped a slow rhythm against the leaded windows of the manor's east wing, where the air smelled of old parchment and damp wool. The storm had passed hours ago, but the sky still hung low, heavy with the memory of thunder. Hermione stood by the bookshelf, fingertips brushing the spines of leather-bound tomes, some older than the house itself. Dust rose in soft spirals with each gentle touch, catching the gray light that seeped through the glass. Draco sat across the room, one leg drawn up beneath him in an armchair that had seen better centuries. He wasn't reading. He was watching her, not with suspicion, not with disdain, but with something quieter, harder to name. A kind of study that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with presence. They hadn't spoken in over an hour, not since the last ward had settled into place, humming faintly beneath the floorboards like a lullaby. The ritual was over. The immediate danger, a flare of ancient enchantment reacting to their proximity, had been contained. Now there was only this, the quiet between breaths, the space between words that didn't need to be said. Hermione turned, catching his gaze. She didn't look away. "You're not what I expected," she said, voice low, as if the room might overhear. A faint smirk tugged at his mouth. "Which version of me? The boy who called you a mudblood? The Death Eater who ran from battle? With a man who's been brewing healing drafts in your kitchen for the past 3 weeks?" She flinched, just slightly, but didn't retreat. All of them, and none of them. He exhaled, long and slow, his gray eyes shifting to the fire, where embers glowed like dying stars. "I used to think the oath made me a servant, a prisoner. But it's not the magic that binds me now, is it?" She crossed the room, moved silent on the threadbare rug, stopped a few feet from his chair. "No, it's choice." "Choice," he repeated, testing the word like a coin between his teeth. "I didn't think I had any left." "You always did," she said. "You just never believed you deserved a better one." He looked up at her, then really looked. Past the frizz of rain-damp hair, past the ink stain on her wrist, to the quiet strength in her eyes. The kind that didn't shout, didn't conquer, but simply endured, and offered. Outside, A single bird called, sharp and clear, cutting through the hush. Draco reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished with age. I found this in the family vault, hidden behind a false panel in the floor. It has your grandmother's name engraved on the back, Elara Granger. She wasn't born a Granger, you know. She was a Selwyn, married into your line, and renounced her magic to save a Malfoy during the Purge of 22. Hermione's breath caught. That's not in any record I've seen. No, because she made them burn it. She loved him. The price of that love was silence. The room felt smaller suddenly, the past pressing in like a tide. Hermione sank to her knees before the chair, close enough to see the tremor in his hands. "And now we're here," she whispered. "Not by blood, not by magic, but because something keeps pulling us back. Maybe it's not the curse," he said. "Maybe it's the chance to say we did better." She reached out, hesitant, and covered his hand with hers. Warmth spread between them, not magic, not obligation, but something slower, deeper. A recognition. No vows were spoken, no spells cast, but in that quiet, something shifted, like a door left ajar after years of being sealed shut. And for the first time, neither of them was afraid of what might come through. Rain tapped gently against the window panes of the old Malfoy library, the soft rhythm-like fingers tracing the spine of a long-forgotten book. The air smelled of dried parchment, beeswax, and the faintest trace of lavender. Hermione's doing, no doubt. She sat cross-legged on the rug before the hearth, the firelight catching the auburn in her hair, her fingers brushing over the cracked leather cover of the Grimoire of Oaths. Draco stood by the mantel, arms folded, watching the way the flames danced in her eyes. "It's today," she said, voice quiet, but certain. "The anniversary. 12 years to the day since the magic released you." He didn't answer at once. His gaze drifted to the silver serpent brooch pinned at his collar. A Malfoy heirloom, yes, but now engraved with a single word in ancient runes. Star Eterna Star. Eternal. A promise, a penance, a gift. "I remember the storm," he said finally. "That night when the wards broke. The house trembled like it was breathing for the first time in centuries. I thought I'd die." Hermione looked up at him, her expression soft. "And yet here you are." "Here I am," he echoed, stepping forward. He knelt beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder against his, but not touching. "Not yet. I used to believe blood defined everything. Purity, loyalty, destiny. But that oath, it didn't care about bloodlines. Not really. It cared about truth, about balance." She turned a page, revealing the faded ink of the vow. No longer glowing, no longer pulsing with magic, but still legible. "Star by the root of the elder tree, and the breath of the forgotten king. The serpent shall serve the lion's kin until debt is paid in courage, in truth, and in love. Freely given, Star, love freely given," she whispered. "I never understood what that meant. Not until, well, until you stayed." Draco exhaled, low and slow. "I could have walked away the moment the magic released me. No compulsion, no curse, just choice. And you chose to stay." He met her eyes then. "You taught me how to choose, Hermione, not out of fear, not out of pride, but because it was right, because Star, you Star, were right." Outside the rain softened to a hush. The fire crackled, and somewhere deep in the house a clock struck 3. No, it felt like twilight in the quiet hush of the library. She reached for his hand. Her fingers were warmed, calloused from years of turning pages and stirring potions and holding wands in battle. He turned his palm to meet hers, their skin brushing and pressing together. "I used to dream of this house as a fortress of hate," she said. "Now it's a library of second chances." He let out a faint laugh, still drafty, still full of bad memories, but ours now, not just mine. "Not just yours," she agreed. They sat in silence for a long while, hands clasped, watching the fire burn low. No grand declarations, no sweeping speeches. Just the quiet certainty of two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. When she leaned her head against his shoulder, he didn't flinch. He shifted just slightly to make space, to hold her there, and in that small movement, so simple, so unguarded, was the true end of the curse. Forgiveness had not come in thunder. It had come in stillness, in tea shared in silence, in books returned, letters written, wounds spoken aloud and not turned into weapons. And love, real, quiet, enduring love, had not arrived with fanfare. It had grown in the spaces between duty and choice, in the slow unraveling of pride, in the courage to say, "Star, I was wrong, star, send," and mean it. The oath was gone, but the promise remained,